G'day Gamer Nation, GM Hooly here. As many of you would have noticed, we here at The Forge have been having a bit of a hiatus. This episode was recorded back in early January and has sat on our server for a while now. There are many reasons for this, including Chris changing jobs and me having some personal health issues. I won't bore you with the details, but just so you all know, I am fine now, but was very unwell due to the stress and strain of the past 12 months or so. So that's why some of the recording content that you'll hear in the following episode may seem a little dated. Many of us are suffering from the global situation that the COVID crisis has placed us in. And now more than ever, we may need to lean on a friend, a co-worker, your HR manager, your boss, or better yet, your family. And not just your relations either, but us here within the greater Gamer Nation community, including us here at The Forge. I know if I wasn't able to, I probably would have been in a very different place. And I wanted to publicly thank those of you, particularly Chris himself, who have reached out during this time. I'd also like to thank my partner, Kerry, for her love and support, that of my 4 sons, and to everyone who has spared me a thought during this time. I'd also like to thank our top-tier patron of Jason Holloway for his continued support, and to all those other amazing Patreon supporters who continue and still continue to support us through this difficult time. If you would like to become part of the Forge community, you can learn more at patreon.com/forgegenesys. And for as little as $2 a month, you can help support this very podcast to keep on keeping, I guess, in continuing to provide you with amazing content. Thank you to all of our fans for reblogging, retweeting, sharing this latest episode, along with those who offer support and encouragement for this podcast. It's truly appreciated. For now, however, let's get on with the show.
Correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to The Forge.
Hello, Gamer Nation, and welcome to The Forge, a Genesys RPG podcast covering everything that you need to know about the latest and greatest in Edge Studios' Genesys Foundry and the Genesys role-playing game. I'm your host, GM Hooly, and tonight we have what we can only hope is a simply fascinating show where we're going to kick off a new series of episodes all about creating equipment in Genesys, which is going to be hugely exciting. But also, we're going to be welcoming to the show an amazing new guest to talk about one of the more intriguing Foundry settings to be released in a good while. It's going to be a wild episode, so jump on board. It's going to be great. But before all of that, let me introduce you to the man who is the cream in my coffee, the butter in my fly, and the Vegemite on my morning toast. It's GM Chris. Chris.
Vegemite.
How do you not like Vegemite? Vegemite and toast is amazing.
Ugh. Tastes like toe jam. Ugh.
It is an acquired taste.
Yeah. But you know what? I am happy to be the cream in your coffee. Although that leads to some illusions I'd rather not make.
No.
Yeah.
Let's quickly move away from that. How was your Christmas? And Happy New Year as well.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. I had a phenomenal holiday. A wonderful socially distanced holiday for the I was going to say for the whole family, but no, it's a wonderfully socially distanced holiday for the immediate family. That's that was it. And I'm getting so old. Like New Year, like New Year's sucked. Like we forced ourselves to stay awake.
Right.
And watch the ball drop and drink a glass of really bad champagne, and then go, okay, let's go to bed. And we went straight to bed. Mm-hmm. It was so pathetic. My kid couldn't even stay up till, I got a 10-year-old, couldn't even stay up till midnight.
Look, that's similar to the meme where it's like 23:59 and then it's Happy New Year, and then 1 minute past it's like everyone's asleep. Yeah, we're the same asshole too.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. How was your holidays on the other side of the world, where you get to experience holidays in the summer?
Yes, we do, and it was bloody hot. That's all I can say. No, it was good. I worked most over Christmas, so that was good for the old back pocket. But we got to play some games. The kids really got stuck into Dungeons and Dragons. So they've been hearing about it from kids at school. So I said, sure, I can run that. It's been ages since I've touched anything D20. And no, it was a lot of fun, really fun. I've been running it for Aten at his school, but he's finished school now. But the school has asked me to come back, which is great, to do some role playing with them. The kids have been having a ball. So I've been keeping myself occupied. Started a new hobby, fish collecting. That's interesting because I'm not busy enough. And
I love collecting fish. Trout is really good. Salmon, really catfish as well down here, with some nice blackened with some good butter. I love adding that to my collection.
Yeah, not that sort of fish collecting, but not for consumption anyway. But I'm glad the fish aren't within hearing distance. Anyway, moving on. So it's been a fun holiday, and I'm really glad to be back on the podcasting bandwagon. So looking forward to this episode in a huge way. So it's going to be great.
Oh yeah, well, P. Sherman, fish collector. Although you're not in Sydney, but you're closer to Sydney than I. That's for damn sure. We got a lot to get into. You want to head that way?
Absolutely. That sounds like a fantastic idea. So let's get those coal fires burning and start with stoking the fire.
Stoking the fire.
And welcome to Stoking the Fire, a segment dedicated to letting you know all there is to know about the releases from the Genesys Foundry and the Genesys role-playing game. But first, Chris, would you like to tell us about the D20 Radio podcast of the week?
Of course. Okay. So I know we just did them as our podcast of the week, but selfishly, we're going to return to highlight the Me and Steve Talk RPGs podcast.
Yeah.
So as we talked about last episode, this show grew from its eponymous hosts, Steve and Steve, finding themselves spending hours in the parking lot after their game sessions talking about the other non-mainstream RPG games they love to play or that they wanted to get to play or get on the table. And they just decided to take that discussion and their shared love to the airwaves, right?
Right.
And they explore varied RPG options that will tickle your listeners' sense of the new and wondrous. But the reason I want to return to the Me and Steve Talk RPGs podcast is because after guest hosting with them back on episode 11 to talk all about Genesys, I actually, Hooly, got to run a one-shot for them in Genesys.
That's awesome. And I've listened to the first episode, and I've got the second episode, which has just been released at the time of our recording, which is ready for download and ready for my listening pleasure. It was
know. It's so good. Yeah, so we ran a nice like almost 5-hour session. And they're splitting it up into multiple released actual play episodes. And at the time of this recording, obviously, session 0 and encounter 1 are already up for listening. So, guys, honestly, if you're keen for some Genesys live play, it's right there for you. The half this crew had no, outside of reading about it and talking about it, had never played with narrative dice before. And no one had played Genesys before, although we did have a couple of Star Wars veterans in the group. So they got it pretty quick. But dude, yeah, we had a lot of fun. And if you want to hear it and hear more of me yammer away on a microphone, like I know what I'm doing, you can listen. And you guys can find that and more amazing gaming and geekery podcasts right now just by heading to d20radio.com.
Absolutely. And after you've given this fantastic podcast a listen, make sure you also check out the amazing blog articles over at d20radio.com. And can I just say about me and Steve Talk RPGs, it is well worth your while to go back and listen to the beginning of all of their episodes. They're a fascinating listen. For an old school person like me, reliving some of the titles that they're talking about in RPGs that you may have forgotten. I was listening last night to one of the episodes where they talked about all the different dice mechanics from a whole range of different systems. And I'm going, I haven't touched that for ages. Maybe I'd like to go back and try that again. So, you can reminisce till your heart's content. It's really, really good. But also, the other thing that I'd recommend is definitely take a listen to that session 0 that you did with the guys. It's fantastic for anyone who has never ever played before. That's Genesys, that is, and you'll get a lot out of it. It's really, really good. Yeah. And while pursuing the interwebs, why not head over to the Genesys Foundry at Drive-Thru RPG, where you can find the latest and greatest Foundry releases for the Genesys RPG. We've had quite a bit of releases since our last episode in December, Chris, haven't we?
Oh, yeah, we have. So, honestly, before we do our spotlight focus for the episode, I think it might be worthwhile to run them down.
Yeah.
So at the time of this recording, we've had quite a few things released. There was the Genesys Vehicle Companion, from C. Beck himself, Christopher Ruthenbeck.
Yep.
Which kind of expands on the core rulebook and the expanded player's guide for kind of a deep dive into the minutia of vehicle creation.
Yeah.
Very interesting supplement. From Neil Cobb, we had another in the hilarious Hero Time series, which is The Arena, which is all about how to run gladiator games, which was kind of cool. Ooh. One that I thought was amazing and helped read through when it was still in playtesting was the latest from Keith Ryan Capel and High Metric Games. Factions 1, a Factions talent supplement. Keith has created a new subsystem for adding faction alignments and abilities for players and adversaries. 65 new talents. 5 generic factions that could be applied to myriad settings, and a whole lot more. Really worth checking out. Adds a whole lot to your campaigns. Yeah. The Chris the Machine Markham, as he does, hit us up with like 3 titles over the holiday. Fantastic factions. Speaking of factions, organizations in Minara, which actually we're talking about, used Keith Capel's faction subsystem to introduce 10 new Terranoth-focused factions and 50 associated talents for Terranoth and its factions.
Yep.
He also released Legendary Locations 2, which is a new gazetteer for Terranoth locations. He's already released 1. And he released Grand Star Alliance gear, which is a gear guide for the Alliance in Keyforged. Obviously, hinting on the fact that he's going to be planning on gear guides for the other factions as well. Also, a couple other things. We had Boost number 5, the latest in the Book of Online Source Triumphs, so sort of magazine. Weird West, which explores the genre bash that I love so much of weird occult and Western. Very cool, and of course authored by various brains in the Genesys Discord server. In this case, Anubis, Chris Markham, Craftador, Michael Shalom Kesselman, and Kyle Sharp. Kyle Scarp. Scarpy. Yeah. Sorry, Scarpy.
This boost gets better every single time it comes out.
Doesn't it? It's
really, really good. I know that I've sort of thrown my hand up if they want some assistance as well. So it's just a matter of finding one that I'm more interested in. It's really good. Really good.
Yeah,
but
really
one that I was heavily involved in as well, and I was so happy that I got asked to be involved. And that's Jared Matthew has given us the Shadow Shop. Now, it's a brand new magic supplement that is it's going to also be our spotlight product for this episode.
Well, now, Hooly, I love magic in this system. Okay. So I've been following this product's development with keen interest. But you mentioned that you assisted on this.
Yeah, I did. So I played the part of principal editor and proofreader on this product. And it's a magical supplement that builds on our new kinds of magic use in Genesys that focuses on the idea of spirit magic or blood magic with a very New Orleans flair.
Yeah.
It's great. Magic with roots in real-world practices that have evolved to, a mythology that infuses hundreds of stories and role-playing opportunities. The ideas that were coming out of my head when I was reading through the manuscript by Jared was I was blown away. Now, most listeners will probably know Jared as the creator of the incredible Salvage setting, which also won a couple of Forge Awards in 2020. But this is his sophomore publication, and it focuses on a more generic rule supplement that exists outside of a specific setting that can sort of be plugged in. So in a nutshell, the Shadow Shop is a guide told in a fun and somewhat unique style with a graphic design that we've come to love from Jared. And when I first saw him, I wasn't sort of privy to all of that stuff going on in the background. It was amazing. And it really explores in details the Crimson Arts or spirit magic, which is inspired by the very real-world spiritual practices such as Louisiana voodoo, Low Country hoodoo, Haitian voodoo, and others. And,
Hooly, I'm grateful to see this. There is actually, I want to call this out. There is a lengthy word count at the start of this supplement in which Jared actually discusses and acknowledges the real-world history of the actual beliefs that have inspired this, and also touches on the tragic history of slavery and segregation and revolution that actually birthed them in their various forms. When we create imagination through role-playing games, we always have to be mindful to never mock or disrespect, as early 20th century authors, quite frankly, made a career of doing, real-world belief systems. And Jared's acknowledgement of this real history and this also admonishment to the reader to research and learn that history. I mean, I actually did some research and reading, and it was like because of what he wrote, and it was fascinating and beautiful. So I wanted to thank Jared for presenting this so respectfully.
Absolutely. You're certainly not wrong. And from, that fascinating cultural touchstone, Jared has created a wonderfully detailed inspiration for these new types of magic types. This includes, as you might imagine, the introduction of a new knowledge skill, which is ritual and spiritual world, as well as 3 new ritual skills, curiosities, trance, and blood magic. Rituals work exactly like magic, but with a few key differences. Most notably, they cost you something. So with blood magic, for example, it causes the caster to suffer wounds to be able to cast them, while trance rituals place the caster in a highly vulnerable state. But more than that, the entire book, all 56 pages of it, gives you even more to put the bayou and the big easy sort of feel into any setting that you might have. Not only are there 2 new species, which was great to see, they were introduced, one called the Marshlings and the other one called the Spree. The Spree are fascinating, and
they are.
Can't wait to get them on the table. 4 new careers, and also added from the Night Hunter to the Witch Doctor, and 23 new talents, which was great, which I thought was a good amount for a new setting book, or setting of sorts, and which focuses on ritual magic and other thematically cool stuff. And it does harken back to a lot of the things that we've talked about during the podcast, that it takes those things into talent, including, rewriting things so that it fits the setting a little bit more. So really, really good there. New magic implements, potions, totems, and even weapons. And of course, we have some great adversaries. So, and things that you can just reskin if you need to. and a host of information and background for a setting based in New Orleans and the Louisiana Bayou. It's fantastic. I can't talk about the product enough.
But for me, obviously, with my proclivities, the Big Bang and the supplement were the 7 new rituals or spells, to use Genesis lingo, governed by these new ritual skills. They're very fun. They include things like animate, bind, and possess. And as Hooly said, they function like Genesis spells. I mean, with tables of additional effects that can increase difficulty to add more to the base effect. And there is even a special subsystem to actually channel spirits with different types of available spirits, a whole host of them, by spending story points, which I loved. Different spirits provide the channeler with varied benefits and varied hindrances in the check they make. The varied checks they make while they're possessed, while they're channeling. And a fascinating subsystem to not only enhance rituals and magic usage, and that alone, whether you use the rituals or not, is something that can port into virtually any setting.
Absolutely.
Totally great.
It's certainly good if you have someone who's a bit of a channeler or like a warlock type character, that you really want to have something a little bit different for Terranoth. It's a great import there, so I would highly recommend it for that. But bottom line, this product is superb. It gives you a lot of tools to add a special set of rules, as I mentioned, and magic, a new way of doing magic to your games. And it's well worth the $6.99 price tag. So yeah, well done, Jared. Well done. It's amazing. And I know we'll have Jared on the show very soon to discuss the Shadow Shop as well. But all in all, just some great products, and you can find them, including the Shadow Shop, and so much more fantastic Genesis Foundry content over at drivethrurpg.com by simply performing a search using the words Genesis Foundry.
And speaking of the Foundry, as we have been, Hooly, we've seen a lot of equipment guides come through lately, haven't we?
We have. We certainly have.
What do you say we maybe talk about that in a little more detail, huh?
I would like nothing more, to be honest, Chris. What say we stride on into The Furnace?
The Furnace.
And welcome to The Furnace, the segment where we take a deep dive into a topic concerning custom creations using the Genesis role-playing game. Now, tonight we're going to kick off a brand new series about the Genesis creation by highlighting something we've not really had a chance to dig much into in past episodes, and that is weapons, armor, equipment, and gear. Now, this episode will be the first in a short series that talks about the ins and outs of creating items.
Yes. And as you know, people love to create equipment for RPGs.
Yeah.
And Genesis obviously gives us a pretty stout tool set to do just that. But the potential pitfalls of equipment creation are varied. And it's all too easy to create an overpowered item as it is to create something that no one's ever going to want to use.
You're not wrong. And as we'll see, a lot of that has to do with the effects of the item, balanced against its cost and in some cases, its rarity. But beyond that, there are a lot of rules, tricks, tips, and in our case, hard-learned lessons to ensure that you're creating an item that is not only fun, but it adds to the setting without breaking the rules too much.
Yeah. So on tonight's show, guys, we're going to focus on the creation of weapons, with future episodes devoted to armor and then to gear.
Yeah.
Tonight, we are talking about the tools that let you deal damage to adversaries. But it's also important to note that though magic implements kind of fall into this category, we will not be covering them tonight.
No, we won't. And I'm assuming, of course, because we've already done that back in episode 19, demystifying the mystical Genesis and the Goblet of Triumph. Right, Chris?
Spot on. So if you're looking for how to create implements, episode 19 is right there for you. Tonight's talk is going to be about knives, swords, pistols, rifles, rocket launchers, flamethrowers, plasma cannons, phasers, obsidian spears, slingshots, grenades, slingshotted grenades, ninja throwing stars, crossbows, longbows, really sharp Christmas bows, harsh language. Okay, maybe not harsh language. That's actually another show.
Yeah.
Just all the weapons, all of them.
All of them. You're a crazy man. Anyway, let's dive in before Chris's head explodes. Tonight we're going to walk you through the process of weapon creation step by step. And even towards the end, we're going to craft our own weapons here live on the show. So it's going to be fun. All right, Chris, where do we start this whole shenanigans?
Oh boy. Okay. So for those of you following along in your storybooks at home, when it comes to weapon creation for your very own games or perhaps your Foundry products, the Genesys core rulebook has all the ins and outs that we're going to be covering, highly detailed. Specifically, please turn your workbooks class to pages 199, 200, and 201. Throughout this episode, we will be referencing the rules in those pages, and you may want to have your book handy and open. But I would like to point out this discussion will no doubt also touch heavily on item qualities, which is a very important aspect of weapons. So I would also recommend that you also either bookmark or put a sticky note on pages 86 through 89 of the Genesys core rulebook, which detail the majority of the item qualities that we might be referencing in this discussion. But I think we also have another big boilerplate that we really do have to talk about.
Yeah. And it's basically reskinning, which is glorious.
Yes.
So I know that we say this a lot, and you've also heard it a lot. But now, right now, do you hear us? Right now, you need to pay attention, probably to it more than you have before. All right, you got it? Good. So if you can rename an existing published weapon, do it. It will save you a lot of hassle. Just remember that you have to use different wording in the description. So just reword it to suit your setting.
Yeah.
But basically, that's it.
That's it. Now, really, there's three reasons that you really want to try and reskin an existing weapon if you can. Three very important reasons.
What are they?
Well, number one, existing weapons have been play tested. Number two, existing weapons have been play tested. And number three, and perhaps the most important reason, existing weapons have been thoroughly play tested.
Yes, they have. Don't reinvent the wheel is basically what we're saying. So you really have to ask yourself the questions. Does a similar or even an identical weapon exist elsewhere in a published source? Does a similar weapon do what I want this weapon to do? And will creating an entirely new weapon meaningfully add something to my game? Now, if you answer yes to two of the above questions, you might just want to reskin an existing weapon instead. File off the serial numbers and call it something else. And also remember, though this doesn't matter for your home games as much, even if you're publishing this, tabular information can be reused or reprinted without any issue. So if you wanted to say that in your game that there's an existing weapon that exists in Terranoth on page something, whatever it might be, you can write up a brand new description for it. But the existing stats can be reused without issue. And it's just simply something like, this works as per dagger on page such and such of the Genesys core rulebook.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
I've even seen supplements, Hooly, that have been published where they don't do a write-up. They're like, consult the table for the weapons for this setting. New weapons. May have additional details in their description, and they will only name and describe the new weapons. And then like 90% of the table is like fantasy weapons that you would find in the Genesys core book or Terranoth. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Again, you can reprint the stats without any issue.
Because the stats aren't the problem. It's the expanded text, which is what is copyrighted. So,
Correct.
Just say these are the weapons that are able to be used, and just say what page number they're on.
Or create a new write-up.
Yeah, or create a new write-up. If you want to take the lazy approach and it's just going to work like another weapon, put a little sidebar on your product. Just say these weapons are usable in this setting and list them with their page number and what book they're from. It's simple. And, you're probably halving your work because, equipment is what a lot of players want to get their hands on. But in a game system like Genesys, it's not necessary to have an expansive use of weapons. It's cool because it can add to your setting, but it's not necessary. So use that word count. If you've put yourself into a word count, use that word count to go further into your setting. That's what my suggestion is, anyway.
So Hooly, then that's the solution. Then, just reskin, and reskin. Good. That was a good talk. That was a good talk on weapons creation. It really was.
There's a little bit more to it than that, though.
Oh, you mean some people might actually want to create some new weaponry?
Yeah, kind of, because we're kind of an educational podcast, are we? Sort of.
Oh, God. That's a label I would never put on myself as education. In fact, I think people get more stupid just by hearing me talk. People get stupider just hearing me talk.
Language like that.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just channeling what my wife says. I don't know. What I'm trying to say is I love my wife. All right, let's talk about crafting a weapon.
Yeah, we should.
Right now, before my wife comes in here and stabs me with one. Right now, guys, we are going to get into the simple step-by-step process of weapon creation. We are going to be paraphrasing and sort of reframing the rules in the book and the pages that we've called out to you. But we are also going to be kind of adding in maybe one or two of our own special steps.
Yep.
And more importantly, combinations and tips and tricks that we have found to be highly valuable when creating a weapon. And like we do, you don't have to follow these steps in order. And likely you will go back and revisit a step after you've already completed it. But we have found as a general rule that following these steps in this order will make for an easier time for you in terms of wrapping everything up easily without missing things and really guiding your creation path in a specific way that's going to be beneficial for you.
Absolutely. All right. So our first step 1, describe and name the weapon. So in other words, what does it look like? How is it used? What kind of training is needed to use it? What does it do? We've found it best to start this way. Not only will your answers inform almost all of the steps to come, but it will give you yet another chance to ask yourself if you need to be creating this weapon out of whole cloth, or if you're better off just reskinning something else that's already out there.
Yeah.
So step 2.
Step 2, once you've got that down, is what skill or weapon type is it? So now that you know what kind of weapon it is, and you've got that narrative in your head, take a look at the skills in your game setting, all right, and determine what skill is going to be used with this weapon. Now, typically, you're going to have either melee or ranged broken out into light and heavy, okay, depending on the setting. As is recommended, you should never have both melee and range broken out into light and heavy. It's one extra skill that you don't need, okay? So whether it's ranged or melee that you break out into light and heavy, a good rule of thumb is that if it takes 2 hands to use it, it is heavy.
Yep.
If it does not take 2 hands to use it, it is light.
Right.
All right. Now, this applies, of course, unless we're talking about a skill without the distinction. So if I'm playing in, for example, a science fiction setting with a ton of guns, but I still have melee weaponry, it would still be melee, to the same skill to use a dagger as it would be to use like a great spear or something like that. But, while in that same setting, your sniper rifle would be ranged heavy, while your holdout pistol would be ranged light. Okay. But conversely, again, in like a fantasy setting, it's going to be the inverse. You're probably going to have one skill for range. So a throwing dart would be ranged. Your heavy two-handed crossbow would also be ranged. But then when you get into melee, your claymore sword is going to be melee heavy, while your stiletto is going to be melee light. Okay?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's for melee and ranged, that's kind of your rule of thumb there. But it could not be melee or ranged. Does it enhance unarmed attacks? Well, guess what? That's going to be the brawl skill.
Yep.
Is it something that under normal circumstances would be a weapon mounted to a vehicle?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's probably going to be gunnery. Could a normal person lift it and use it without difficulty? No? Well, it's probably going to be gunnery. And it's ranged. It's probably going to be gunnery. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It honestly is not too terribly difficult of a process to figure out what skill is going to be associated with this particular weapon and what weapon type it is.
Yep. So where you're looking at is exactly under the combat skills. Simple as that.
Yeah, that's it. Now, the skill you choose will also, of course, determine typically whether this is a ranged or a melee weapon, and that's important for price and damage, as we'll come to in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But Hooly, can a weapon be both ranged and melee?
Well, of course it can. A dagger is a really good example. There's going to be some cases where you are going to have that happening. So you have to define what the skills are used in either scenario. You need to keep the item qualities. You need to keep the crit rating and the damage the same, regardless of how it is used. It's a little bit different one of the things that I found just through reading other supplements and other things that I've done is that what you should really do is choose one. When you've got the description, choose one, whether it be ranged or melee. So whichever the one that is most commonly going to be used. Now, if we use an example such as, and I'll go back to Star Wars here for a minute, if we look at Rebels and we've got Zeb. Now, Zeb has his, I can't remember what it's called. You're going to be able to correct me on this, Chris. The blaster rifle that he can use, which can also turn into this melee weapon. So if it's more often used as a ranged weapon, put the description under the ranged weapon area of your supplement, and then say towards the end, you would then say something like, this can also be used as a melee weapon, put a little bit of a description, and then say these are the stats that it will have when used as a ranged weapon. And then you don't have to worry about putting it in the ranged category of your table. Yes. Because sometimes it can get you it can get the reader a little bit confused as in, okay, where am I looking for this? That it's in the one spot for the area that it's most commonly used. So that's a bit of a tip as well.
I'm a little hurt that you didn't remember the name of Zeb's bow rifle.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And actually, Hooly, I mean, the Lasan Honor Guard AB-75 bow rifle was traditionally used by the Lasan Honor Guard, with blaster barrel capability and an integrated bayonet, but also the electromagnetic pulse generator tips.
Right. Someone's given you the book on equipment and stuff like that, haven't they? But anyway, moving along.
So, okay, we have our description, we have our name, we know what the weapon does, we know what skill, what type of weapon it is, and what skill is used to wield it. Yeah. What is step 3?
Yeah. So step 3 is encumbrance. Look, it might be strange to think of encumbrance as your next step, but the type of weapon this is and the skill it uses really determines encumbrance. Furthermore, step 1 to 3 that we're going through really do not impact the final step, pricing and rarity. So we're going to cover that next. So steps 4 to 7 do impact pricing.
Okay.
So with brawl weapons, they should have an encumbrance of 1. All right. So anything that you're using to enhance the brawl skill is going to be an encumbrance of 1. So melee light and range light weapons should have an encumbrance of 1, but sometimes they can also have an encumbrance of 2.
Maybe. Yeah, sometimes.
Sometimes. Melee heavy and ranged heavy weapons should have an encumbrance of 3 or 4. And gunnery weapons can have very high encumbrance, as much as 8 or even 9. And we'll get into more stuff that probably gunnery weapons should have as well. But yes, this is intended to be too much for one person to wield, in other words, which is why such weapons are either mounted or require special attachments or feats to offset their weight and size.
Mm-hmm.
So step 4.
Well, step 4 is the big one, damage. So now that you've gotten the preliminary steps out of the way, which, as Hooly said, do not impact pricing and rarity, we're now moving into the real crunchy bits that really affect combative use and ultimately are going to impact pricing and rarity. So you know what the weapon is, you know what it does, you've named it, you know what skills used for it, you know how heavy it is, what its encumbrance value is. Step 4 is damage. Now, we have found it best to next move directly to damage in terms of the steps here, because the damage will and should inform the other steps to a large degree. In this step, you need to determine the damage you want to see from this weapon. All right. Now, we really do need to talk about this in terms of melee weapons versus ranged weapons, because the tips are a little different here. So with melee weaponry, and that does also include brawl weapons, as you know, Hooly, those don't have typically do not have a set damage value. It's always a plus X, okay? Yeah. A plus 1 or a plus 2 or a plus 3, all right?
Yep.
Because brawn is added into the damage, all right?
Yep.
Brawl or melee light weapons typically have a plus 1 to a plus 3, all right? Melee heavy typically has a plus 3 to a plus 5, depending on how nasty it is. Yep. All right. The thing is, though, in this step, if you're making a melee weapon, unlike ranged, you then need to derive the average base damage, which is really important for pricing later. You just need to note it. All right. You need to note it for pricing later because it matters. Okay. That is going to be the plus of the weapon, plus 1, plus 2, plus 5 if it's a big old melee heavy. Okay. Plus 3. All right. Because the average melee fighter is going to have a brawn of 3.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. Okay. So that's really how you want to consider it. So if you have a plus 2 weapon, you need to know that its average base damage needs to be calculated as 5. All right. If that seems low to you, remember that increasing melee damage happens every time a character increases their brawn. Okay. Right. So it is best to start low and err on the side of caution, especially if you're building something from whole cloth.
Yeah.
Now, with ranged weapons, and that includes gunnery-based weapons, it's a bit easier. Ranged weapons have a set base damage. You do not add your agility to it. Okay. Yeah. Ranged light weapons are typically going to have 4 to 7 base damage. Ranged heavy, typically 8 to 12 base damage, with 12 being really hardcore heavy weaponry. Gunnery are typically going to have 13 or higher base damage. Because they're the big honkers that are literally attached to vehicles. And guys, feel free to more liberally adjust these values for certain weapon types. You're going to have to for range. These are just suggestions. They're not hard and fast rules. I mean, grenades are a prime example of this. A grenade, is probably going to do a lot more than 4 to 7 base damage. Okay.
Yeah.
Even though it is a ranged light weapon. So grenades, prime example of that. Again, it's a suggestion, not a completely hard and fast rule.
Yeah, exactly. And something that I've certainly heard people argue about when it comes to melee weapons is that they're reluctant to have those higher values because they think that it's overpowered. Well, realistically, as you say, Chris, if you add 3 to whatever number that you've chosen, it still isn't comparable to what ranged weapons do. And I tell you what, if you've ever had or been to like a medieval fair or something like that and seen the power that goes into some of those weapons when they come down, it does. Could you imagine if they were like absolutely, sharpened weapons? It's insane the amount of damage that they would do. And it's also devastating from the perspective of that it's probably going to take your limb off, in which case that might go down into lower criticals, but we'll get to that in a tick. But it's certainly comparable. So don't shy away from melee weapons having that higher value. Because
this is a holdover from Star Wars. Because in Star Wars, you never saw a +5 melee weapon. That was insane. Okay, and that's setting determined. Because if melee weapons could outshine ranged weapons, nobody would use blasters. Okay, and consequently, I'm sorry, I'll take a Smith & Wesson 38 over a broadsword any day. In terms of damage that it will do to your, metaphorical wound threshold, both will kill you dead. Okay, just as fine. But it's one of those things that if you, I do want to stress to err on the side of the caution with melee because the thing is also when you go to a medieval show and you see those guys swinging those swords around, those are strength 4 dudes. Okay, those they have bra in the 4. They do. Okay, and that's it's the impact it's going to have. It just is. It just is. Well, okay, dude. Speaking of firing at a distance, what is step 5?
So step 5 is all to do with range. So that's how far away you can be for the weapon to be able to operate successfully. So for melee and brawl weapons, well, it's going to be pretty easy to work out that it's engaged. For ranged weapons, you should typically have a max range of short or higher. Most range light weapons should be short or medium. Most range heavy weapons should be medium or long. Although extreme range isn't out of the question. Depending on the weapon, of course, for example, like a sniper rifle or something like that. But gunnery weapons should always be medium, long, or extreme. Some people have argued that you should be able to have range weapons that are strategic. Maybe, but it's going to be very rare.
It would be an extremely rare thing, and if I had a that we're getting down a rabbit hole here. I would almost create a new combat skill for it.
Yeah, absolutely,
and it would be intellect based.
Because it's that over the horizon stuff.
Yeah, it's not your agility. It's math.
Yeah. Pretty much. Now, one thing I will say, even though that I did say with melee and brawl weapons that it's engaged, don't forget that there are some weapons that do have their melee capability that goes out to short, and that will be things like.
Where have you seen that?
Well, I'm glad you asked. In the core rulebook, in the Weird War setting, we have the Razor Whip. It's on page 161. The Realms of Terranoth, it has the Pike on page 94. Shadow of the Beanstalk doesn't have any, but Secrets of the Crucible does have the extending ability, which is on page 140. Now, there are some conditions that they have with these particular items. Now, obviously, I could only find these 3, which means that it is very rare. But it still can be done. So with the Razor Whip, it's got Unwieldy 3, which means that it's not particularly easy to use. So you're going to have an agility of 3. The Pike has Prepare 1, which isn't a massive deficit, but it does mean that you're going to have to waste a maneuver just to use it in the turn. The Extending, however, does have an interesting sort of change to it, which says that it retains the average difficulty to hit at short range. So there seems to be this unwritten rule that you have to have some sort of downside. So it is very rare. You're 100% right with that, Chris. It isn't sort of for every piece of equipment. There is no two ways about that. But when you've got melee weapons like lances and things like that, which we haven't seen any official stats for, I would imagine that it will have the same sort of thing, that it'll be a melee weapon, but it'll be used up to short range. It's an interesting choice. Like, if to put it into D&D terms, short range is out to about 6 squares.
Exactly.
About 30 feet.
I mean, and look, we're not counting squares. These are abstract ranges, okay?
Yeah,
and short is supposed to be a ranged distance. Short is not even like you can be at like engaged range with somebody without being even engaged with them. That's another difference too. All right.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. I disagree.
I don't necessarily subscribe to it. I can see what they're getting at, but at the same time, I would not recommend it. That going out that far is just insane. Now, if you've got a weapon that is like that, or that's how you see things, you might want to consider that it might have a special either a quality, or it might have something in the descriptive text that says that it can't be used in engaged. So, because it's so unwieldy, but that's another, that's something else entirely. But that's another rabbit hole we're not going to go down.
I certainly not a standard practice. And I would, if you're going to do something like that, guys, play test
Sure, but the stats are FFG approved. So there is that.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other exception to this rabbit hole that I have seen successfully work before, although, as we said, typically, as Hooly, as you said, ranged weapons should have a max range of short or higher.
Yep.
There is feasibility and some historical accuracy in creating a ranged weapon that works at engaged range. Okay. Yep. Mm-hmm. The difference is, though, that there are set difficulties for using a ranged weapon at engaged range, and they're not easy. Mm. And you would typically only do this on a weapon that was a ranged weapon that was tiny. Okay. Mm-hmm. Like a good example I could think of is like a Derringer. Okay.
Yeah.
Or a James Bond, dart watch that shoots a dart at somebody, right? But you're literally just 3 to 5 feet away from them. That is engaged range. Okay.
Yeah.
But even then, but we have set difficulties for that. I think that's the difference.
Yeah. I mean, like anything, you can always break the rule with the descriptive text that you have for each of the weapons. And you just got to remember to put that in there and make sure that you highlight that as a point, because most people will just play as per the rules. But there are going to be exceptions to the rule, but you need to explain yourself. And as we said at the top of the show, you need to play test it to make sure that it works. One question that I do have, talking about range, how would you do a lance?
It's a melee weapon.
I
mean, what does it need to be different?
No, I don't think it does. But I know that will be a question that somebody no doubt has asked. Because it's fairly long. It's, it's certainly not 30 feet long, but it's certainly a long thing. I think that it's still, you keep it within engaged, because a lance is not something that you should normally be using in hand-to-hand combat unless you're in a mount, and they have special things for all of that as well.
Yeah. I would rely on the other qualities of a lance, which is... I would probably give a lance a special quality, something to the effect of, if you are attacking an enemy first with this weapon in a round, like maybe the weapon gives you a free rank in the talent. What's that talent that gives you a boost? It's rank that gives you a boost die when you're attacking first.
Quick strike.
Yeah. I mean, I could see it giving you a rank in quick strike. That would be a really good narrative way to represent it. Okay.
Yeah.
That would be a really good way to represent it, but narratively. But yeah, I just
big rabbit hole. I should say. Right. So, what about though step 6?
Step 6, critical rating.
Mm.
Now that you've determined damage and range, you need to determine critical rating. How lethal do you want this weapon to be? All right. Now, the bottom line is you got a min and a max range of 1 to 6 on the crit rating, the number of advantages it will take to activate a crit. But we have to say 1s and 6s are very, 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 very rare and should be rare if they are used at all.
Right.
Okay. Rules is written, you can go 1 to 6. Realistically, you should never use a 1 or a 6. There is virtually no reason. I mean, good Lord, especially for a purchasable item, something you're creating, no way, no how. The average crit rating is a 3. Okay, this should be your starting point. You want to make it a very deadly, very dangerous weapon, you can drop it down to a crit rating of 2. All right?
Mm-hmm.
Crit ratings of 4 mean that a lasting injury is far less likely, and a crit rating of 5 means it will almost never happen. Okay, without a triumph, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And those are oftentimes things you want in a weapon. A badass weapon is not something that necessarily has to create a lasting injury. So yeah, that's But once again, when it comes to crit ratings, 3 is your starting point. You want it to be really nasty, make it a 2. You want it to be, if it's not likely to puncture a lung or lop off an arm or something like that, then yeah, make it a 4 or a 5.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that there's some arguments to say don't ever go to 2 because there are talents that can turn that into 1 on 1.
Yeah,
and when you can only ever do 1 critical in a round, doesn't matter how many triumphs and advantages that you roll. But just remember that for every additional crit that you reach with advantages or triumphs, it's adding 10. So if you've got something with a critical rating of 2 and it has an item quality like Vicious that adds 10 or more, depending on its rating, you can kill someone outright. Simple as that. And it's realistically the only way you can die in this game. So
okay, rabbit hole for crit rating.
Right. Let's do it.
Let's talk about using Genesys, which I have been asked about, to recreate the disruptor weaponry from Star Wars. Okay. Now, here's the deal with disruptor weaponry. All right. So Hooly, you're familiar with disruptor weaponry from Star Wars, yes?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So they have a long and storied history, and if you go into the Star Wars rulebooks where narrative dice, really started, there is the disruptor rifle and the disruptor pistol, and the key thing here is this: the damage on disruptor weapons is ridiculously like a disruptor pistol has a base damage of 10. So does a disruptor rifle. Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The disruptor pistol has vicious 4, meaning it adds plus 40 to any crit. The disruptor rifle has vicious 5. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But in the special rules text, it specifically says that whenever a victim is hit by a disruptor, any critical hit will result in a crippled effect, unless the roll on the crit table would result in an even more grievous injury. So to put that in Genesis terms, in terms of looking at the Genesis crit table, crippled is 96. All right, and I believe it was very similar in Star Wars.
Yeah,
that means that this thing, even with vicious 4 or vicious 5, depending, is going to roll a minimum of a 96. Minimum. Okay, to cripple one of the target limbs for until it is healed. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the vicious quality as well, and the sheer amount of damage they do, disruptors were they were death sentences. It was absolutely insane. The way Star Wars managed to balance them, and they still, frankly, were not balanced and still do cause a lot of problems on the game table. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The reason Star Wars was able to balance them is because they had fairly high rarities, but more importantly, ridiculous costs in the thousands. All right.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, they had a thing that we will come to talk about when we talk about price and rarity, and that is the restricted quality. Okay. Because Star Wars is more than just a role-playing game set of rules, it's also a setting. They can do things like, it's like saying, oh yeah, in this setting, this weapon will get you 20 years in prison by having it on your person. Okay.
Yeah.
That alone is a balancing feature. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're wanting to create something like this from a critical standpoint for Genesys and have a weapon that has that level of capacity, it needs to be something that has a role-playing consequence so severe that most characters are going to have to really think twice about ever holding one of these things.
Yeah.
All right. That's my point.
So, yeah, disruptors, bad. I've only ever used one once in a campaign that I've run, and it was instantaneous. The character's arm was just incinerated. So, gone. So, when you start throwing that at your players, they start running away really quickly. But if they get their hands on one, make sure that you're putting everything after them for it. Because it's better anyway. All right. And just on that point, though, with the restricted quality, although it's not really a quality, it's more of it's a state of mind. But the restricted quality is in Shadow of the Beanstalk. Page 85, there's a sidebar in relation to that. There's no massive rules for it for those who don't have a copy of Shadow of the Beanstalk. But basically, to be able to find it, instead of using your negotiation, which you normally would to purchase items or to find items that are available, you use your Streetwise because obviously it's restricted, unless, of course, you have some sort of rule in place with regards to people being able to own restricted items. And there is a talent that is also in Shadow of the Beanstalk for exactly that purpose.
Yep.
But I digress. Talking about special things, step 7 is where we're going to talk about special rules and item qualities. Mm-hmm. Now, this is an optional step, first and foremost. It is totally okay for a weapon to have any item qualities or special rules. In terms or not have them, even. In terms of the core rulebook, the item qualities on page 86 to 89 are really where you need to start to look at. Now, this is the point in time where you go back to your earlier steps to not only inform the weapon's special qualities, but maybe even adjust your numbers from steps 4 to 6 to make things more holistic. And that really is the key thing. Item qualities and special rules should enforce a holistic view of your weapon once you defined back in step 1. Now, we've got a few serious learned lessons, paraphrases of book wisdom, and, a few tips and tricks for you all when we start talking about special rules and item qualities. So our first one is beneficial item qualities should be few in number. Now remember that most beneficial item qualities require advantages to activate. So it's going to be highly unlikely that multiple are going to be activated on a single attack. So if you've got 2, for example, you're going to need 4 advantages. 4 advantages may be a critical hit instead. Something which the players often choose to do, unless it's a sort of special item quality that they really need in that specific circumstance. And it's probably the reason why they're using that weapon in the first place. Having more than one beneficial quality should be the case only when you want the weapon to give the player options for spending advantage. And consequently, you don't want to inundate your players with too many options either. The last thing you want to do is have a player sitting there for 2 or 3 minutes working out how they're going to spend that advantage. That's just going to slow down play. It's going to annoy other players. And yes, there are items which are out there which do have multiple qualities on them. But they're normally specifically designed for a purpose. Grenades is one. It's got quite a few qualities, but a lot of them in those sort of circumstances are things that are just going to be the standard. They don't need advantages to activate. They talk more about the item quality, or the item's design, I think is what I'm saying there. But you definitely don't want to inundate your players with those too many options. Also if you want to give them abilities such as things similar to talents, remembering that you don't necessarily want to give them talents, you want to give them things that look like talents. They've typically got enough to worry about. So, and so do you, because sometimes some of these weapons are going to fall into the hands of your NPCs as well. And you'll have to be remembering all of these little different things as well.
Mm-hmm. The next piece of wisdom we can give you when it comes to special items and qualities, special rules and item qualities, negative item qualities, which, bless you, Genesys, you include quite a few, can help balance a weapon out. Okay? Yeah. Don't forget they're there, whether it's cumbersome, prepare, inaccurate, inferior, slow firing, unwieldy. These qualities can really make an overpowered weapon much more balanced. The advice we would give you, though, is to try and keep this to a single negative quality if you add any of them at all. If you're getting into multiple negative item qualities, I've usually found that been because somebody's trying to replicate, like I've seen players get so into this that or writers get so into this that they try to turn what? Let me stand up a chair. Okay. Well, it's going to be inaccurate and it's going to be unwieldy and it's going to be cumbersome, or inferior. I'm like, dude, no, it's just an improvised weapon. Yeah. It doesn't need a stab. So if you're going to use negative item qualities, try to keep it to one. But remember that it can really help balance out a weapon. The best example of this that I've used when I've created some stuff, actually, it mattered for the sniper rifle I created just for the one shot I ran for me and Steve. Right. The prepare or the slow firing negative qualities are phenomenal balancing for high damage weaponry. Yep. The sniper rifle with prepare is a classic example where, you got to spend a maneuver to rack the round in. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's a great way to help balance out a high damage weapon.
And don't forget also that some of these negative item qualities do have ratings. So it can be like prepare 2, which means that you need to spend 2 maneuvers to be able to do it. Slow firing 3. I've just pulled that number out of my head, but that can really slow down the use of that particular weapon. Things like your unwieldy and your cumbersome, I love those qualities, and I wish they'd do more in that sort of nature. But it's great for things which are, you want players to be able to use them as a heavy weapon, but you want to show their size more so than just a higher encumbrance. You want them to be that the only way that you're going to be able to use them is if you are a strong person, because this thing is a massive polearm that's made purely of metal. All right. So our next tip, don't double up on similar qualities. For example, pierce and breach are exactly the same thing, just in a different scale. Look, pierce is breach is just pierce 10, ultimately. Breach 1. Pierce basically maxes out, although technically speaking it doesn't. Breach is for your going through armor of a tank or of a vehicle. The pierce is normally resigned into that sort of 1 to 4 category, and even a pierce 4 is hugely impressive.
Yeah,
it's going to ignore soak, remembering that most people are only going to have a soak of 2, maybe 3, depending on how you go. And so you're just ignoring that. Even with armor, you're going to ignore it.
But outside of that example, which is a good one for just similar qualities, you want to avoid. I mean, those are identical qualities. You want to avoid similar qualities. I mean, look. I mean, I know concussive and disorient have different effects, but you should not have them together on a weapon. Okay. I know that auto fire and blast are very different, but you should not have them together on a weapon. Okay.
No.
You know, they both accomplish the same thing of damaging beyond one target. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't double up on similar qualities.
Yeah.
The next tip, somewhat related to this, is that you got to realize some things just do not make sense in some circumstances.
Yeah.
Do the rules stop you from putting accurate and inaccurate on the same weapon? No, they don't. But why would you do that?
Yeah.
All right. Do the rules stop you from adding auto fire to a melee weapon? I just looked, and no, they don't. But why would you do that?
Yes, why would you do that?
It just doesn't make sense. You need to use your common judgment here. Don't double up, and remember that some things just don't make sense.
Yep. One really good example of something that you shouldn't do, also talking about auto fire, is linked. Even though some do exist in Star Wars, I think that's just nasty. Why would you do that? But anyway, because it's kind of doing the same thing.
It is, yeah. It's just yeah.
It's a different mechanic, but it's pretty much the same sort of thing. So, really take a look at that. Our next point, use Pierce wisely. Now, I mentioned it before. Pierce is your magic tool to give a weapon with a low damage a higher effective output of damage. So if, not satisfied with the average damage of a 4 for your newly created stiletto, with its paltry +1, a rank or 2 of Pierce suddenly makes it the deadly weapon its narrative suggests. It's that simple. So, do you have a newly created phase pistol whose narrative talks about phasing its energy blasts past or through solid matter, but the 6 damage it has doesn't reflect that properly? Well, that can be narratively represented by a couple of ranks in Pierce. But look, be wary and avoid the temptation to add Pierce to weapons that already have a high damage output. Now, it might make narrative sense that your newly created Great Cleaver that is intended to rend flesh from bone should have Pierce, but then you look at its +4 and average damage of 7 and realize that adding Pierce on top of that is probably just a little bit too much.
Probably just a little too much. Yeah.
It's probably a bit much. So, it is a balancing act. And as we said, you can put all of these things on, sure. And no doubt if it's got things like that, your gamers are just going to flock to it very, very quickly. You don't want to have the must-have weapons. It's kind of like in the same sort of vein as we've talked about in the past about talents. You don't want to have must-have talents, because must-have talents, everybody's going to have it and it's going to end up boring and it's probably going to break.
If it's a must-have anything, it usually means it's broken.
Yes. Yeah. So, balance that out. It's as simple as that.
All right. Now, the next tip is as our last one, and we spent a long time talking about item qualities and special rules, but this is an important one for me. This is one that is mine, and it means a lot to me, and I want you to listen to it because it's important. Mm-hmm. And I have had so many hard learnings that have really jacked up my play tests as I've been working on a couple different settings, even before the Foundry came out. Okay. Right. Mm-hmm. But most notably has caused a whole ton of rework and re-refinement with my Aegis setting, which is, sci-fi, futurism, superheroes in space. Understand the kaboom quotient. All right. That is the tip. Because what do I mean by this? There is a whole lot of misunderstanding at the table around blast, disorient, knockdown, and concussive from a narrative sense. In a narrative sense, they are, in many respects, brothers from another mother. They live in the same house, and that is the house of the narrative kaboom effect. All right? It is the effect of jogging somebody so freaking hard that they go kaboom. Okay? It's a kaboom of some kind. As a GM and as a designer, you have to instinctively understand the difference between these, when to use them, and realize that rarely, if ever, should any of these 4 abilities be combined together in the same weaponry. Yes, there are a couple of examples where that actually does happen in the book, but that is the exception that should not inform your weapon creation design. So, Hooly, I want to talk about these in order to talk about how powerful they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Talk to me about knockdown.
So good old knockdown, the thing that everybody has if they're using any sort of brawling attack. Basically knockdown, it knocks your single target prone, and that can be from like a blast effect, or even from a clever melee move with, due to the weapon's construction, the thing that you're using. As I said, it's great because everybody who does an unarmed attack automatically gets that as one of the item qualities, effectively, from your fists. So what it's effectively doing is it's forcing your foe onto the ground so that they have to then, in the following round or in their following turn, that they have to spend a maneuver to get up. I mean, obviously they can crawl if they want at half speed, but most of the time they're going to want to get up off the ground. So you're forcing them to spend that maneuver. So it's a great ability as far as that goes, and gives you a little bit of control, for want of a better term, on the battlefield, because you're slowing them down because they have to do something else. Now, another thing that is there is, and this is very unusual, although it's not unheard of, that knockdown can be used for ranged weapons. Now, it's valid if you want to represent like a blast type effect, air quote, but don't particularly want to have the blast do additional damage. You just want the kinetic energy of this particular weapon to knock them down. In other words, knocking them off their feet. Now, it is also a really great option for larger, unusual melee weapons. For things like whips and chains, it's an absolutely fantastic option, and it makes total sense. But also for big melee weapons that don't so much as trip a foe, but it knocks it down with an unbelievable amount of kinetic force. Things like great clubs, etc., are really good examples of that sort of thing.
Yeah. And if you're doing martial arts or brawling, it makes sense. You can trip your foe. I mean, that's really what knockdown comes down to, right? But knockdown is the baby brother in this family when it comes to the boom. All right, I mean, you're popping somebody so hard, or so like you're knocking them off their feet. All right, yep. That's the baby. All right, the second youngest child in this family is disorient, and this is the classic ringing of the target's bell. I've rung his bell, dazing them with a hit so powerful that it disorients them, okay, which is an actual condition that obviously imposes a setback die on the checks they make for however many rounds they are disoriented. This is as you said, it's available for natural brawl attacks, and consequently, it is a fantastic quality to give to brawl weapons, also melee weapons that bludgeon their targets, all right? Mm-hmm. Really, really great quality, and it's kind of a step up in the Kaboom family. But what about the next oldest brother?
Well, the next oldest brother is Blast. Now, this is about a spread of damage. Damage with an area of effect. Targeting one foe with the potential to damage everyone else around them. Grenades and explosives,
That's really what it is. Yep.
That's all of them.
And then we come to Disorient and Blast's and Knockdown's big, smelly, mentally unbalanced older brother, Concussive.
Oh, God, yes.
Concussive is a single target effect that is the bell ringer of bell ringers. It is one of the nastiest, most potentially overpowering things you can give a weapon because it staggers a target if you pull it off. And Hooly, what does staggered do as a condition?
Yeah, staggered means that basically you can't take actions.
This should be reserved for very, very, very rare weapons that are made of very, very unusual things or are powered by very, very unusual things. The Kaboom family operates a narrative space of bell ringing, basically, as I've said a couple times. And you've got to understand the Kaboom quotient here. You have to understand if your narrative for this weapon that you defined all the way back in step 1 says that that I want this to have the ability to ring that target's bell. Okay, you need to understand what that means. If it's a minor bell ringing, it's going to knock them on their butt. Okay, that's knockdown. If it's going to ring their bell in the classical sense, that's disorient. Okay, if it's going to boom and really deal damage to multiple targets in that sense, it is blast. And concussive is the bell ringer of bell ringers. All right.
Yeah.
Understand the difference because you don't want to misapply because it fits the narrative. Understand that lower versions of the Kaboom family can often satisfy your narrative at a much less of a power increase, a potentially overpowering aspect to the weapon. Does that make sense, Hooly?
Absolutely, it does.
All right, man. Well, step 8, our last step for everything we've talked about so far. Cost and rarity.
Yeah. Now, in this final step, you're going to add the ultimate balance to the created weapon by adding its cost and its rarity. Now, when we talk about cost, the good news is that you've already done almost all of the hard work. Simply turn to page 199 of the core rulebook and glue your eyes to table 3.1-2. Weapon cost calculations. Every choice you've made in weapon design up until this point will be referenced, or at least alluded to, on this table. Now, you're going to start with a cost of 0 and just start adding cost based on damage. Yep, that's average damage for melee weapons, critical rating, range, and the various item qualities you've given it. Now, we're not going to go through each option as pretty much you guys can read, so we're not going to worry about that too much. But one key call out on the table, and, don't forget it, is the last line item on it. Once you've calculated cost, if it's a melee or brawl weapon, reduce the total cost by 50%. And even then, this is just a base. You've got to use your judgment and potentially alter costs further to have it simply make sense. So, for example, if you built a knife using this method, the average damage is 4, and with its +1, and a critical rating of 3. Now, it would cost 125, not the 25 that it actually costs and should cost.
So this is an example where you really do need to apply your judgment. It's like, not why does a knife only cost 25 when if you look at this table it should cost 125? Because they're mass produced. Because Stone Age peoples can make them. Because it's a ubiquitous knife, right? That has to go into your costs, and as we'll talk about next, also your rarity.
Yeah.
So let's talk about rarity. This is the tough stuff here, because the book actually, Hooly, gives you very little guidance on assigning rarity to an item in these pages. The literal text basically says, it's up to you. However, guys, as a short primer on rarity, be sure to check out pages 82 and 83 of the core rule book, where rarity is detailed quite heavily. Specifically, table 1.5-1, rarity, gives you some great examples of common items and their rarity. And to give you some examples, a knife, the aforementioned knife, would be a rarity of 2. All right. A semi-automatic pistol would be a rarity of 5. But what's important to note here is that setting matters, because a black powder pistol in a medieval or fantasy setting would be much rarer than a semi-automatic pistol in a modern or sci-fi setting, probably pushing the pistol up to rarity 7 maybe, or even more, depending on how rare you wanted to make. That's really unusual, right?
Right.
Also, pages 82 through 83, where they talk about rarity, table 1.5-2 rarity modifiers also tells you when you should adjust rarity, but keep in mind that those adjustments typically do not apply to the base rarity of the item if you're creating it. Those adjustments typically have to do with geographical locationing and other environmental and circumstantial factors that are going to affect rarity. Getting a swimming pool in the desert is the the example. If I'm in the big city, I'll go find a swimming pool dealer. That's going to be a rarity of 4. But if I'm in the desert, it's going to be a rarity of 10, right? The bottom line, though, it is up to the GM to assign base rarity, and a lot of that is going to depend on the setting and on the time period of what you're creating.
So, creating weapons can sometimes be a little bit of guesswork. But hopefully all of this has really kind of helped you to get a bit of a grasp. And I did actually find a little bit of a tool, which we'll put a link in the show notes, that one of the many people on the Genesys community created that does the work for you, which is absolutely fantastic. And it does it for all weapons, whether they be brawl, melee, or ranged.
Yeah, it's an awesome browser-based cost creation calculator.
It's great. And that will obviously, as we've said, that will go up and down depending on what the story behind the weapon is, and how deadly it is. Because the more deadly things are, the more expensive they're going to be, or the harder to find that they are. So take that in consideration as well. So Chris, I reckon we should do an example. What do you think?
I think that's a phenomenal idea.
Excellent.
As we hosts love to do, we're going to put our money where our mouths are. We're going to create some brand new weaponry right here on the show, following the steps that we've outlined above, and we're going to bring something new, hopefully, for your tables. It goes without saying, though, Hooly,
yes,
that what we are creating here tonight still hinges on being fully and completely and concretely and properly play tested.
Agreed. Because what we're about to create may break the game completely. So,
or it could be a lot of fun. We don't know. We don't know.
Yeah.
We're going to follow these rules, and we're going to come up with some goodness to it, and it should work. But we'll see. We'll see.
So let's start with you, Chris. What have you got?
All right. Many years ago, I ran some one-shots for Star Wars that was inspired by a long-running campaign, a brilliantly ideated campaign by my good friend GM Brev, Inglorious Rebels. Do you remember this?
I do.
All right. Inspired by the movie Inglorious Bastards. The idea is Inglorious Bastards in Star Wars. So literally, they're behind the lines, killing imps. All right, that's what they did. So for those one shots, I created all these pre-gens that mirrored the characters from Inglorious Bastards, and that included a force-sensitive stealth assassin named Shoshana. All right. Now, at the time, I had created a vibro garrote for her. Which went through a few play tests by fire, and ultimately I found that I just never got it right. It was either useless or way too overpowered. So I want to take another stab at it. This is, from my learnings, this is my attempt to bring the garrote into Genesys using these rules. All right? So let's walk through the steps. Remind me, what's my first step?
All right, so step 1 is describe and name the weapon.
Well, there we go. At its simplest form, the garrote is a short, thin, and very strong length of wire or rope with handholds at each end. Its purpose is the nefarious art of assassination, strangling an unaware target until they are incapacitated or killed. Popular due to its ease of concealment, many a victim has fallen to its deadly simplicity. My goal here is not to make a deadly weapon that has tons of damage output. I want it to use item qualities to achieve its goal as it slowly kills you. All right? Because that's what the garrote is. It takes a while to strangle somebody to death. All All right.
Yeah. So, step 2. What skill or weapon type is it?
Okay, so talk to me about this. I think I made the right choice here. You could make the case for melee. You could.
Mm-hmm.
But when you consider the narrative, the idea of wrestling the target you're garroting and the pure, martial artistry that is needed to do this and the brawn needed to do it successfully, I think brawl is much more fitting.
That's a tough call. I think that brawl is most accurate. But I think that if a listener was doing it, I think you could probably justify melee.
I think so. I think so.
You could even go out on a limb and say that you could use one or the other.
Ooh, that would be intriguing. That would be very intriguing. I'm gonna keep it at brawl for the time being, and that's also going to impact my damage output. So maybe through playtesting, I might determine that I want to boost the damage by a point, in which case I could turn it to a melee weapon, still keep it light, and accomplish that. But I'll keep it brawl for the time being.
The only problem that I can see that you'd have with that is that by making it a brawl weapon, it automatically gets knocked down. Now, if that's what you're wanting to do, that's fine.
Yes.
So in that case, brawl is probably your best choice, yes. So step 3, encumbrance. How heavy is it, Chris?
Oh, that's easy. This is, by narrative in step 1, one of the smallest, most concealable weapons around, right?
Right.
Encumbrance 1. Easy peasy.
Yep. Easy. Right. Step 4 is damage.
Oh, boy. Okay. This is tough. Now, like I said, from the narrative I put into this earlier, like I said, this should be relatively low damage on a single hit. A single attack from a garrote is not going to kill someone. It shouldn't. Okay? It's about repeated attacks. The goal is to maintain and repeat an attack each round until the target is toast. Narratively, I've got this length of wire wrapped around their neck and I'm yanking until they're dead. Okay? But what that means mechanically is every round I'm going to be engaging with them and making another attack. All right. And we've all watched James Bond. Okay. What happens when somebody gets garroted, especially Bond? You see those those attacks occasionally failing round to round. Right.
Yep.
Your target is going to slam into you with their elbows. They're going to wrench their fingers beneath the garrote. They're going to, break away from you for an instant. And the next round, you're going to have to, you see them engage, attack again, and wrap the wire around again. Right. That's the mechanics. It doesn't change the narrative.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that in mind, I'm going to, again, assuming a 3 brawn, have an average damage of 4. Okay.
Right.
That's what I'm going for. That means it's going to take a few rounds to kill somebody with this.
Yep.
That's going to be the trade-off for its concealability.
Right.
So ultimately, if I want that average damage of 4, assuming the 3 brawn, that's going to be +1 damage, which is obviously fitting for a brawl weapon anyway. And again, if I play test this out and I find that it's not enough and I want to bump it to 5 damage by giving it a +2, I could make this a melee weapon.
True.
Right? And also, I think the real usability in this weapon is going to be in the special qualities it has, but we'll come to that. So damage +1. Done.
So our step 5, which is range, not hard here, really, is it?
Engaged.
Indeed.
Number 1, make it so. Engaged.
All right. So step 6 is its critical rating.
Okay. Now we get weird. Hooly, narratively speaking, the garrote is a lethal weapon, right?
Right.
But is it a weapon that actually inflicts intensive crits?
Not really, no. Unless it's a monofilament wire.
I'm just going for a garrote.
Right.
I could create a monofilament version and it would cost a heck of a lot more. I don't want that. I want 2 wooden handles and a piano wire. That's what I want.
Right. Makes sense.
But it really doesn't. And this was kind of a hard pill to swallow as I was designing this out. It's not like a blade or a bullet. It's not going to inflict lasting damage quickly. That's not the garrote style. It's a wire around your neck.
Yep.
So I'm actually going to go for a crit of 5 on this.
Interesting. And that's totally understandable, actually, because, the weapon is designed to basically choke someone to death through suffocation.
Yeah. It's not going to cripple a limb. It's not going to, it's just not going to do it.
It's still going to potentially crit, like you could, as I just said, that you could suddenly, crack their windpipe, which would be an interesting effect. So crit 5. Most of the time, it's not going to happen, but it can. So yeah, cool. Awesome. Mm-hmm. Step 7, special rules and item qualities. Now, this is what you've said is basically where you were coming from. This is where you wanted most of where the weapon is based around. So
yes, this is the fun stuff. Item qualities. This is where the weapon's going to shine. I'm going to add in 2 item qualities and 1 special rule, which I'll explain. I'm also going to start by saying the item quality you're not going to see in the stat block here is knockdown, because I don't have to add knockdown because it's a brawl weapon. All right. Taking my target to the ground, getting them prone while I'm choking them is actually very narrative for a garrote. Okay. Yeah. But because this is a brawl-based weapon, I don't need to add it. It's automatically added. Consequently, I don't need to increase my cost when it is added in this way.
Correct.
Okay. The 2 item qualities and the special rule that I will be adding are going to potentially increase the cost. Okay. So let's talk about item qualities. The first one, and it's a classic, ensnare. Ensnare 1. All right. This is the classic use of a garrote, is to lock down your foe, to immobilize them, in addition to, choking them to death. And honestly, ensnare handles this perfectly. If your opponent has you garroted and they decide to pop those 2 advantage, you have no maneuvers for a round. You are not going anywhere. Okay. I went with 1 rank in it because I think 1 round of inability to perform maneuvers is good enough, because honestly, immobilization actually prevents the drawing of weapons.
Yes, because it's a maneuver.
All right. Yep. The narrative of struggling with your attacker while slowly having to draw your weapon out to deal with them makes sense. And to me, that represents being ensnared and not ensnared, round by round as the attacker and the target struggle. You're ensnared 1 round when they pop a couple advantage to do it. The next round, they hit with their attack again, but they can't kick off ensnare again. Well, you can now get your maneuver, and now you can take your weapon out and try and shoot them. But then the next round, they ensnare you again, right? Again, that round by round struggle that's going to be so interesting with this particular weapon. The next item quality I've given it is disorient 2, because this is another classic trope of the garrote. It is literally squeezing off your oxygen flow, leaving your head swimming. And that effect is going to persist for a good bit, even if the garrote is removed, as you cough and gasp and catch your breath, which we see in films all the time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And to me, that is represented by 2 ranks in disorient. All right. I almost went for concussive 1 here, because I thought staggering was quite fitting for a garrote. Because it is.
Yeah.
The problem, though, is that if you kick it off, your target gets no actions. And that means no chance to overcome the ensnare quality. And I really wanted it to have ensnare as well.
Yep.
If you have, we talk about the tips and tricks we had earlier where you need to make sensible choices. Ensnare and concussive are not brothers from another mother. They're not even similar. They have very different effects. But if you were to pull them both off at the same time, if you happened to roll 4 advantage, okay, that would be a ridiculously overpowered and game-breaking situation. You have denied your opponent all maneuvers, and you have denied your opponent all actions. It's just too much.
Absolutely. Can I make a suggestion that you could have done, and this may change things, I don't know. You could have also used stun. Not stun damage, stun.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's another way of looking at it, is that you could have done stun 3 or something like that. That therefore you're bypassing soak. And realistically, when you're looking at a garrote, you're not sort of affecting body armor or whatever else. You've got them around the neck. So using stun basically avoids the soak problem. I
really, really, really like that idea. That's a fantastic idea. That's an absolutely fantastic idea. I mean, God, what would you, because stun 2 doesn't seem fitting enough for me, just dealing 2 strain that bypasses soak.
No.
What would you go for? Stun 3?
It's 3 or 4, I think.
Ooh, that's going to get expensive really fast.
Yeah, look, if that is the case, I think that probably Stun 3 is going to be your best bet. Now, as much as Disorient would be a fantastic option, and it certainly suits the weapon better, I think that the stun quality is going to suit the needs of what you're talking about, to choke somebody out, affecting their strain much, much better.
But yeah, no. I really like that idea. Okay, let's do that. Let's do that. Let's get rid of Disorient 2, and let's replace it with Stun 3. That's a fantastic idea. All right, well, let's work that out. So now we come to the special rules. I believe in its little narrative description box, the Garrote deserves 2 special rules due to its narrative nature. They don't really have a corresponding item quality, and for the most part, they don't really have an in-encounter use. Okay? Right. The first is, any checks made to discover a Garrote secreted on your character automatically suffer 2 setback dice.
Yep.
All right. The other one that I think is very fitting, additionally, due to the nature of this weapon, your GM may rule that it is ineffective against certain threats with unusual anatomies or compositions.
Yes.
Depending on the setting, not all foes breathe and not all foes have necks.
I'm sorry, I'm just reminded of Star Trek 6 when Kirk hit that alien in the knees.
Not everyone keeps their genitals in the same place.
Yes. I love that scene. So yeah, no, that I absolutely love that. One additional thing that I might suggest is having something that sort of it's harder to get out of because you're almost in a grapple. And if you look at Terranoth has its grapple talent, which I can't remember what tier it is now, but it requires 2 maneuvers to get out of engage range of. Now, I know we've got the
ensnare.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was never a fan of that rule in Terranoth, quite frankly, because ensnare exists.
I don't think anybody has ever done grapple properly, to be perfectly honest, because you basically needed a law degree to be able to understand it in Pathfinder.
Oh, man. That's hilarious.
The ensnared quality, in the last line, it says an ensnared target may perform an action to attempt a hard athletics check on their turn to break free from the effect.
Exactly.
But they can still do it. And hard, I think, is enough. So yeah. Yep. No, I'm down with all of that. I think that sounds great.
All right.
8 is cost and rarity.
Well, now we get to go through the table on page 199. All right. Mm-hmm. So walk through it with me. I have an average damage of 4.
Yep.
All right. That's going to cost me 100.
Yep.
I have an engage range. That's not even on the table because it costs me 0.
Correct.
Right. Crit of 5 costs me 0.
Yep.
Ensnare 1 costs me 200.
Yep.
Stun 3 costs me 150. With my earlier choice of Disorient 2, that would have cost me 100. But Stun 3, which I think is fitting, costs me 150.
Right.
Now, there's also the special rules it has for the 2 setbacks on checks to discover it, but also ineffective against certain foes. What we have here is a case of positive and negative special rules. So from a costing perspective, I'm actually going to cancel them out. All right?
That makes sense.
That is a derived cost of 450 divided by 2 for a brawl weapon. So, Hooly, does that mean my Garrote costs 225?
That's really expensive. So, no.
Yeah, that's really expensive. So, like we said, guys, it gives you a base, but then you've got to get realistic with it. I mean, look, yeah, this should be more expensive. This is a very simple weapon. It's wire and handles, okay? But the thing is, a proper Garrote is more than an improvised weapon. It is a finely crafted instrument of death. It has to be light and supple due to its ease of concealment, but it has to be able to do its job without breaking and while also giving the wielder a proper purchase to use it. Okay? Yeah. So it's not all the way down to the caliber of a knife, which is just a shiv that anyone can make. Okay? It needs to be more expensive than a knife, but I'm sorry, 225 is just too much. especially when you consider that incredibly low damage. I pretty much want to cut this in half, man.
I don't have a problem with that. I think that, anywhere between, 100 to 150, somewhere along that would be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to go for 110, maybe 100, 110. It still makes it a relatively expensive item because it is a specialty item, which explains why not everyone and their uncle carries one compared to, say, a knife.
Yeah.
But I think that price is much more reasonable considering its construction and its damage.
Absolutely.
Right? And then lastly, I've got rarity. It's kind of a specialist weapon, so I think it's going to be more rare than a knife. You're not going to walk into Walmart and get a garrote, okay? But having said that, I think it's going to be likely much less restricted and easier to make and to ship than a pistol.
Yeah.
So I'm going to set it at rarity 4.
So to put that into perspective, that's going to be, to find it, that's going to be a difficulty of average. So that's going to be 2 purple die to be able to use. In this case, it might be just due to the nature of the weapon. It may be streetwise because it's an illegal sort of thing. But on the base of it, 2 difficulty, I think that's pretty easy to find. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you'd have to play around with that as well. It depends on the setting, depends on the background. It may increase, or if you're sort of in more of an underworld type thing, it might be lower. But 4 sounds about right. Absolutely.
Fantastic.
That's really, really good.
All right. So what crafty creation have you cobbled together, you conniving... I'm running out of alliterative C words.
Yeah.
I was going to use one, but it's really inappropriate, so I don't want to...
Yeah, starting with a C, no. No.
No. How about okay, you fantastical fabricator of I'm leading into the F because I know what you got in your show notes. What have you made for us?
Well, they are the fantastical. That's not part of it, but I had to throw it in there. They are called the Fistigons. Or Fistigons. So recently the family and I have been on a bit of a Marvel binge, and everybody I think knows by now that I'm a huge fan of superheroes. But the latest show that we've been watching is Runaways, which unfortunately only got 3 seasons, but they were 3 seasons of goodness. So with that in mind, I've decided to choose a weapon that is a little bit different from the norm, and that is the Fistigons. They're basically Warner's gloves. The Fistigons are the weapon of choice of Chase Stein, who is the son of famous inventor Victor Stein. Why is it the bad guys always have the name Victor? Because it probably sounds cooler.
I thought Victor Stein was one half of Firestorm. Or am I thinking of a different Professor Stein?
No, I don't know now. I wonder, but that's his name in, look, comics share each other's names all over.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Plus, you're talking Marvel.
Yes.
I'm talking DC. What the hell am I talking about? Okay, continue.
Now, in a rare moment of empathy, Victor, a clearly disturbed megalomaniac, recognizes his son's talents and helps his one-time protege create the Fistigons. These act as both brawling weapons and ranged weapons, giving this boy genius enhanced powers in a group that is mostly made of people with superpowers. He's the Tony Stark, I think, of this particular group. So the Fistigons grew in ability over time in both the comics and TV series, but I think I'm going to look at the early iterations of the comics version, mainly because they're a little bit more interesting and they can obviously do a lot more fun stuff on the artistic scale as opposed to special effects and things like that. So,
cool.
Step 1.
Describe and name the weapon.
Exactly. So these are bulky gloves, but they're obviously a little bit lightweight. So, they're going to, it's going to have some sort of an impact when we talk about encumbrance. Now, they have the ability to use pyrokinesis. The Fistigons can shoot out flames and construct various flames into various shapes or patterns. It's got electrokinesis, which can release some type of electrical blasts, projectile launchers, which can launch missile launchers, and concussive blasts, which can emit this concussive energy blast. They also don't appear to have any sort of power source that have to be charged up. They just are always charged. So that's something that we might want to consider there. Step 2, what skill weapon type is it? Now, because these weapons, they're both a brawling weapon as well as a ranged weapon. So it's going to vary. I think that obviously the main stats that I'm going to display, because they've got the most abilities attached to them, are going to be displayed as ranged weapons, with the ability to use them as brawling weapons in the text that we'll have of the description.
That makes sense. And it's like, and like, I'm assuming when you get to this too, like when we talk about like cost and stuff like that, I mean, you're gonna have to cost this like a ranged weapon if it's got that functionality.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So for our encumbrance, they are light weapons, which, as we've mentioned previously, is only really going to be a 1, maybe 2. I think they're on the upper end of the scale, so I'm going to make them encumbrance of 2. So that's at no additional cost. Right. The step 4 for damage. Now, the damage of the Fistigons is good, but it's not great. It's better in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing. So I think the base of 5 damage here is suitable. But as for the brawl damage, I think I'm going to give them a +2 because they appear supercharged, and also that matches with the 5. So I'm not really going outside the realm of difficulties there. So
yeah, totally.
So that's only going to be 100 for the costs for a start. For the range, well, they can't really fire great distances, I don't think. So I'm going to keep it at medium range. And obviously, when it comes to brawling, it's going to be engaged range. So it's only going to cost me about 100 there, which is cool. I'm pretty happy with that so far. Then we've got the critical rating. Now,
step 6.
Yeah, step 6. I don't see him doing a lot of permanent injuries to people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that the critical rating, look, I've said 4, but I'd even be inclined to say 5. Just based on the fact that it doesn't do a lot of damage permanent. It's more it's more about throwing people around and getting people out of the way and disabling them. That's what these ranged weapons are for. So, look, I've said 4. I'm going to stick with 4. If you want to change your mind, please do so. So I reckon that's going to be about 50 for that step.
On costing, yeah.
Yep. So step 7. Now, this is where things are going to get a little bit more interesting. So step 7 is special rules and item qualities. Because they're really quite versatile as far as using them as ranged weapons, I'm going to give them a few little mod cons. So the first one I'm going to give them is concussive 1. Because that's what it's an expensive exercise, but that's what they're used for. Is to, disable the enemy so that they can run away.
They're not damage dealers. You're there hoping to roll that to advantage so you can deny them that action for a round, basically.
Exactly. And I don't think that I want to make it too powerful, so I didn't want to go concussive 2. So I just think for 1,000, I think concussive 1 is fine. Now, there may be modifications that can be made with attachments and stuff like that, but we'll talk about that in a later episode, no doubt, where you could add on concussive to that. And then I also think that it has the stun quality as well. So I'm just going to give it a stun 4.
It's reasonable.
So again, it's another means of basically knocking them out. And so that they can escape to fight another day.
Now, Hooly though. Now, as I'm looking at table 3.1-2 weapon cost calculations on page 199, it says for other positive qualities, which stun would definitely fall into, that it's 100 per rank, right?
Right.
But then after that, in the little parentheses, it says or 250.
Right.
Okay. Now, initially, when we were doing our write-ups, we thought that might have been like a max at 250, but I actually just got some clarification on that recently.
Yep.
Or 250 applies to positive qualities that don't have a rank.
Right.
So in this case, it would be 400 for a stun 4.
Right. That's a little bit nasty. It certainly increases the cost a little bit, but only 150, so I'm not too upset about that. So that gives me a total cost of 1,650 monetary units. But because of the type of item it is, I'm going to give it a rarity of 10.
Ooh, it's unique.
Yeah.
It's unique.
It's unique. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could probably get away with a 9, too.
Yeah, possibly, because people could make it or people could duplicate it, sure. But, certainly at the start, I'm going to give it a rarity of 10 because they are the only one that exists.
Now, Hooly, in your description, man, you talked about like fire and electricity and like grappling or entangling capabilities. None of that seems represented in this. Do you have future plans, perhaps?
Look, I'm thinking that this particular item does.
You said missiles. You said missiles, Hooly.
I did. The one thing that I think would possibly even make this, and we'll discuss this later, but I think in another episode, that is, I think that the cost would probably be increased based on what I want to do. So it's going to have a few more hard points so that attachments can be put onto these things so that they can have their missiles and they can have their doing strange things with electricity and stuff like that. But for a base weapon, I think that's fine as it is. But yeah, we'll talk about that definitely in this series of episodes when we start talking about attachments.
Yeah. And guys, I'm sorry to string you along like that, but you guys notice if you've gone through this, we haven't mentioned hard points. Now, for Star Wars players who are very familiar with the narrative dice system, hard points are like a key part of equipment, right?
Right.
And hard points and attachments. But if you get into the Genesys rules and you get into just the raw rules around item creation, a weapon or armor or anything else as we'll get into, hard points aren't mentioned. It's actually a supplemental optional rule set.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
So as Hooly said, we are going to actually, as a part of this series, have a dedicated episode talking about nothing but hard points, but more importantly, attachments and creating attachments, balanced and beneficial attachments for your weapons and armor. And dude, I'm going to call an audible. I think as reasonable as we can, I think we should revisit the weapons we have crafted in that episode, and I think we should hardpoint them, and I think we should create attachments for them.
Yes. That sounds cool. I love that idea. That's fantastic. Let's do that.
Awesome.
All right. So what we've got are 2 brand new weapons we would love to get your guys' opinion on. And Hooly, if people want to, maybe get a gander at some of the links that we've talked about so far, or maybe see these builds in action, or maybe even review those tips that we went through in such excruciating detail, do they have to listen to this podcast and take notes, or is there an easier way they can get access to that information?
There is certainly an easier way, and they can go to forgegenesys.com, where we will have on our, we'll have a link to it. You can download the PDF document and take a look at that. And it's, I'm pretty happy with the way that the rest of them have turned out. Some of them I still haven't got to. I know that people have been asking some of the vehicle ones, but it's the stuff that we've got up there. It's great. So they'll be able to download this directly from there. So take a look at that, and we'll also be posting those links up on Facebook as well.
Indeed. Well, I can't wait to continue this series with our next episode, which will be all about armor when we return to this series. That's going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, if you guys, as we proceed for that, as we move on to armor and equipment, if you have any specific things that you'd like us to tackle, or even weapons, if you want us to go back and tackle the weapon, we'd love to hear it. And at the end of the show, we'll get into some contact info for us. You can also head to forgegenesys.com to find our various contact methodologies through various email or social media platforms. Let us know if you've got a tricky item you want us to try and create. Let us know. We'd love to do it on air.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be fun. Very, very good. Well, that was a really interesting discussion.
It was, yeah. It was a lot of fun, man, and I'm very intrigued to see what the next series holds. But do you know what else intrigues me, Hooly?
What's that?
Speaking of interesting and unique items and weapons, is some of the fantastical steampunky CG goodness that was found in the recently released setting Children of Aten.
Ah, yes. with Jared Henry, I believe, is the author of that. So, yes, it's amazing.
It is, man. I've been totally impressed with this since it came out. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could like maybe pick his brain about this setting and talk about it in some more detail?
I reckon that we probably could. And I reckon we'll do that in Breaking the Mould.
Breaking the Mould.
So the Genesys Foundry is an exciting community of fan-created content for Genesys, new settings, new rules options, adventure and campaign modules. Not modules, but modules. And so much, 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 much more. But some creators go above and beyond, subverting our expectations and our understanding of what might even be possible in some cases, and breaking the mold with the work they do. And our Breaking the Mold segment is dedicated to showcasing an exciting offering available right now in the Genesys Foundry as we separate the pure alloy from the slag and we point you to the best content out there.
Now, tonight's guest is the creative mind behind a gorgeous and inspiring new setting on the Foundry that blends fantasy and steampunk seamlessly into a rich new world, Children of Aten. This fresh-mint effort from writer Jared Henry totally blew us all away and introduced not only a fresh and unique setting concept, but a set of new and interesting mechanics to complement all of it. Now, at 130 pages, Children of Aten is a setting where there are many, many worlds, or realms as they're called, each with their own unique biomes and native species. But they are unpredictably connected by pathways that might open or close anywhere at any time. But where it really diverges from most fantasy settings is that magic is rare and very, very dangerous, lending to more steampunk than traditional fantasy.
Now, Children of Aten also lends itself to these massive, epic, universe-spanning fantasy adventures with a focus on epic battles that play even heavier into steampunk, but bringing in siege engines and these massive weapons of war. And all in all, this product it's just a delight to read. It's also beautifully illustrated, and we really wanted to dive into it. You know, we actually spotlighted this in our announcement section in our last episode, and shortly after that, we're able to reach out with and confirm. Very glad to bring onto the show the author himself for the very first time, Jared Henry. Welcome to the podcast, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, dude, it is phenomenal to have you on. And I know we were chatting before the interview started. You should be very proud of this product, sir.
Thank you.
And I think it's hilarious though, because there were some interesting life circumstances that maybe led to this product getting released faster than otherwise would have been released. But you know, maybe we could talk about that. But listen, first of all, it's good to have you on, and our listeners are hearing you for the first time. And before we talk about Children of Aten, we'd love to get to know you better. So maybe, dude, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your gaming career?
So I didn't really get into tabletop RPGs until a few years ago with the FFG Star Wars system. You know, I'd been playing video games, including RPGs, for a long time, and maybe since honestly, things like the community D&D episode, it may have planted the seed of with the right people, this might actually be pretty fun. It's something I hadn't really considered getting into for a long time, and then finally just kind of looking for some some new hobbies for my wife and I to get into together. And we there's this Star Wars system that has been, people seem to like it. Let's try it out. We'll get the beginner game, and so actually started playing that, just the two of us, and since then I've started playing online and other things, and got really into that. And then so when Genesys came out, that was really the only other tabletop system that I've really gotten into. So yeah, I've had a lot of fun with the narrative dice system for the last few years, and had this setting idea that I wanted to get into it.
Well, and get into it, you did. I'm over here grinning ear to ear that, man, it was, and God bless Star Wars, it was Star Wars that pulled you into this hobby formally.
Yep.
And scant years later, you've published your own setting for Genesys. That is the beauty of this hobby. I freaking love it.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. All right, Jared, as you've just mentioned, that you're relatively new to the hobby of role-playing games, and, your experience with other systems and other genres may be a little bit more limited to more experienced grognards like me or Chris. But a question we always ask all of our guests is what style of game setting, or theme do you like to get onto the table when you play? In other words, what's your favorite thing to play in Genesys?
So what I've actually played the most in Genesys so far has actually been more sci-fi. A little harder sci-fi than Star Wars. Just so we're not doing exactly the same thing as what we're already doing. Because I haven't actually gotten in and run a real game of Children of Aten yet. That's still, I'm probably going to start that soon.
Oh,
but I kind of took a break after getting it out, and then I've had some of my campaign ideas for a long time because I want to get into playing the the more pure fantasy. Star Wars is already more fantasy than sci-fi anyway, but
yes.
But obviously, there's style differences there. So, I'm excited to get into that, as opposed to sticking more to the space side of things. So.
Well, if you need people for your game group, bro, I'm intrigued to get some play in on this setting. And quite frankly, I think a lot of people are. If you were to put out the call, I'm pretty sure you'd have a full table in about an hour and a half.
Pick me.
So that's fantastic. So, okay, Jarrett, talk to me about Children of Aten. Give us the pitch. Tell us about it. How would you describe it to someone who's looking to purchase it? What makes Children of Aten different from other supplements, and what kind of content can players expect to find in it?
So I think one of the things that sets it apart is how dense it is. There's a lot of realms, and I wanted there to be content for all the realms. So there's a lot of content overall. Most things don't have this many playable species or this many adversaries, or a whole bunch of different worlds with examples of the different kinds of hazards or encounters that you might run into there. Obviously, all settings have some of those things just by nature of kind of the way that I came to be making this. I wasn't thinking of it as a Foundry product at first, and kind of created a base lore that required, this kind of extra density in the world for me to be happy with how it came out. It came out with, what I think is, I like to think is a rich world, or worlds rather, with, a lot going on. And that I hope, to me, the way I see them, they all feel distinct. There may be multiple, desert realms, but the way things work in them and what you'll find in them is still, noticeably different.
Well, it's got that feel of, I don't know, this sort of, it is multidimensional, but it's sort of this, in the best way possible, it's sort of this kitchen sink feel. I mean, it's Keyforge without the sci-fi, really, when you get down to it, in terms of that same.
I can see the comparison.
Yeah, that's that same kitchen sink feel, which I know is really enjoyable. But I mean, dude, what about the development and design of Children of Aten? I mean, how was this born? Where did it come from? What did the development process look like? Because, as you point out, this is a really rich, thick, deep setting, especially from the fluff or the mythology of it.
Yeah, so it's actually an idea, kind of the base idea that sparked what became Children of Aten is from, I don't even know how long ago. I'm pretty sure before I even started playing tabletop games, it was an idea in my head for a video game, just kind of like daydreaming about, if I were making a video game, what would I do? And that's kind of where some of the base ideas came from, which the book is written enough from an in-lore perspective that it doesn't actually say this in the book, though if you look at the map, that's the most likely place that people might notice this, but it is a fantasy version of our solar system,
right,
where all of the planets and terrestrial moons, or major ones, are inhabitable. That's kind of the very base idea that it came from. Was that's all the moons of Jupiter and all these things. Let's put variants of a species on those and have this whole solar system that for magic reasons is all inhabitable. And then some of the lore kind of emerged from that. A lot of it actually. I put the world that's covered in that has the plant-based playable species and all the native people are creatures and everything are all plants. Is Mercury, which is Nabu in the setting,
right?
Because that's the closest to the sun. So there's just why would anyone bother being an animal there when you've got all this sunlight available. There's just weird little things like that, and there's lots of influences from various things, or even inside jokes that are mostly for me. I put the little green men on Mars. Just looking at existing mythology to expand from that idea of, let's make a fantasy setting where the whole solar system is inhabited, and then, how to make that work. These people don't have spaceships yet, but we want, traveling. So that's where the idea of the pathways came from, with the kind of random portals that open up between the realms. And yeah, it's not really talked about in the sci-fi context. I have batted around the idea of, this would be far in the future, of making a kind of future state of it where they could also voluntarily travel, do more of a sci-fi within this world. That's a level of ambition that I'm not going to be jumping on anytime soon.
Well, with the steampunk influence too, you should look up Spelljammer, the old fantasy setting, which was basically a sort of fantasy steampunky pirates in space kind of thing, sailing the solar winds between worlds. You could easily make that transition. Yeah, I've heard that comparison, but it is in a setting that I'm actually familiar with. So, yeah, what often happens with convergent inspiration, I think. Yeah, totally.
And so I just kind of kept building out the setting for the game that I wanted to run, really, which was kind of to have this sort of crazy, there's some sci-fi in the background, but really a fantasy setting to do, kind of epic Lord of the Rings style stories in was my goal. Not that the setting really resembles Lord of the Rings at all. The setting influences were from, a bunch of other ideas, but that's kind of the sort of story that I wanted to tell in it, and that's where a lot of the influence came from as well.
Yeah, if you look at some of the incredible art that you've got in this book as well, it's like, so if J.R.R. Tolkien took a bunch of drugs and and started writing.
Yeah, you can say that. Maybe.
That's my vibe.
And yet, I'm someone that likes to be really influenced by art in the creation process. When I'm just making characters for a game, especially with Star Wars, this is easier to do. There's a lot of art out there, so I'm always looking for art of the character to kind of help me finish fleshing them out. I have a vague idea of what I want to do, and then I find the art, and that helps me fill it in. So, getting art, I commissioned art for the playable species, and some of the equipment and things like that in the book came from the way the artist took the original description that I had, and then what he made sometimes influenced things that ended up getting into the book. And then the adversaries and stuff was mostly me doing that. It was kind of a similar process of, I was kit bashing, public domain creatures to, make my venom spitting spoon-billed rooster. And, so just kind of whatever I could find that would, go together and look like a cool creature. And then I'd, figure out what their abilities were and stuff sometimes after I had put it together.
Well, I mean, and the art is so evocative. So you mentioned you had a lot of pieces commissioned for this, and then a lot of stuff that was public domain or as you put it, kit bashed, which if you have the graphic design capability to do it, I mean, is a wonderful way to get some custom art.
Yeah.
But the art is evocative and just absolutely beautiful, and there's so much of it. And I also want to thank you for, you have it spread across 2 pages in the PDF, but then you also, with the purchase of the setting, include a beautiful high-resolution image of the map of the realms. Mm-hmm. And when you look at that, and as I'm looking at it now, you can really see that solar system parallel that you're talking about.
Yeah.
That is really cool, man. That's really cool.
Yeah, and that really is, like I said, everything except the playable species is me. I'm not really an artist, but I just took public domain stuff and bashed it together, and so that is a map of the solar system that I put a texture over to make it look older and labeled.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, that's how the rest of it comes together.
Oh, it looks great.
It is indeed very cool. I have to reiterate what Chris is saying there. So, speaking of kit bashing, or putting things together, Chris is always having a go at my segues, so hopefully that was a good one. Anyway, when you're dealing with new threats and weapons and rule mechanics, of which obviously there is quite a bit in this supplement, especially when you're talking about epic battles and siege capabilities, which honestly, we haven't seen really anything like that before in Genesys. The process of design and testing, probably even more so when it comes to, the difficulties that you'll experience. Obviously, that can be quite daunting. So what did the playtest process look like to you?
So I got a group together and we kind of did a, like I said, I haven't done a real campaign in the setting yet, but I just kind of, railroaded in a way that I very much wouldn't do for a regular game through, here, have some XP for no reason and, get whatever abilities seem new and interesting to you, grab a weird species and, we'll throw some encounters together that use some of the weirder things that I've inserted because, some stuff is, tried and tested, through Star Wars and Genesys. And I know this is such a slight tweak. This is going to work, but let's try this weird thing. So we just kind of ran through a short, very disjointed campaign where we were, trying out, whatever seemed new and weird in the setting and making sure that it worked. And there definitely were some adjustments, to make sure that, everything made sense and felt good to use. But
yep, that's the process that we all go through. And Chris, what's that called?
Trial by fire.
Exactly.
But yeah, so it was...
And you had the time.
Effectively ran a terrible game to on purpose to find the problems.
Well, you've got some good players then, and you had the time. We were talking about because of COVID, you were in between jobs and found yourself with a glut of time to work on this.
Yeah, I'm. I have a stable job now, but it is the third one since the start of COVID that I've been through. So the temporary one became more temporary than it was supposed to be. But I think it was mostly, if not entirely, during the first gap. I was getting kind of close. And that gave me some time to really crunch down and get through kind of the stuff that I had left to the end. Like we mentioned, this is an old idea. I've been chipping away at this for a long time, but that got me through the. I'm finally going to sit down and write my flavor text for all the items that aren't actually unique to the setting and the stuff that wasn't as fun, so that it's ready to get out there and get play tested and get it published.
Yeah.
See, Hooly, it was cracking me up because Hooly and I are on different sides of the bandwagon here. You were telling me I can write 10,000 words on flavor and theme and mythology all the live long day. But God, you tell me I need to write a paragraph for each sword, I'm going to shoot myself. And me, I'm the guy that's like, oh God, I don't want to get into mythology. But yeah, you need a description for every single weapon in there. I'm your man.
It's true.
Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, so for people who are intrigued by this setting, and you should be, just looking at the cover art should intrigue you. Can you give us a glimpse of something exciting or unique in Children of Aten to whet our appetite? And maybe even also share with us your favorite thing in this supplement.
So I think something that's exciting about it is actually the way that magic is handled in a way that's both kind of tonally calmer than some of the stuff that you might be able to do in default Genesys, but it's still really dangerous and present and interesting in the world. There's no attack spells, no one's throwing fireballs around. Like I said, there is some Lord of the Rings influence. But there's still curses, and hypnotism is something that I added as far as a new magic action, which is difficult to do, but really powerful when it works. We had some fun with that in the playtest.
Yeah, I loved that new magic action.
I think the whole magic system is. I really like the way it fits into the world.
Yeah, and you played off of it extremely well, and you treat magic as very dangerous, which I really really like.
As it should be. All right. So our final question is, and I'm really keen, as I'm sure Chris is as well, to find out what's next for you, Jared, in the Foundry.
So I did, like I mentioned, just kind of take a break after I finally got this out there for a while. But I have started working on a much smaller project that will be, I think I will write it specific to the Children of Aten setting, but also in a way that it could easily be used in others, which I tried to do often throughout the main book as well. But I think I will release this as a standalone. Should just be a few pages, but essentially options for fantasy or other low tech settings for when you get that maimed crit and you don't have cybernetics available for peg legs, hook hands.
Okay, that's cool.
Things of that nature.
Yeah, that's cool. I love it.
So that's something that I realized was missing. Before I get into this, there's a lot of dangerous creatures in the setting. Someone might get their arm ripped off at some point. So I'd have to come up with it then. So let's figure out what a hook hand looks like.
So
in this setting,
fantasy themed, like cybernetics, basically prosthesis.
Essentially, yeah.
That is awesome.
Absolute gold,
dude. Well, I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see it. But listen, listeners, if you haven't checked out Children of Aten, you absolutely have to. It's every once in a while, one of those new settings or ideas comes along that really sparks my interest personally, and diverging from the norm. And when you read it, and you just say to yourself, "God, I gotta play this." But the theme you focus on, especially with the epic, universe spanning fantasy adventures, that Tolkien inspiration, it really comes through in this work, Jared.
Yeah.
And that tone, the steampunky feel, and the new rules, especially you have for like epic level combat and siege focused combat, I think is something that we haven't seen a whole lot of in the fantasy realm yet. Mm-hmm. So there's a tremendous amount I think people can take from this.
Yep.
Well done, sir. Excellent work. Thank you so much for coming on to talk with us about it.
Yeah, thanks, Jared.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here, and it's always fun to talk about this kind of passion project. So anytime.
Wonderful. Well, maybe we can have you back on to talk about hook hands when the time comes.
Yeah.
Excellent product. But look, Chris, I think we've spent a lot of time tonight talking about all sorts of things, but I think that it's time for us to answer some questions. What do you think?
Sounds like a plan, Hooly. I'm eager.
I could not agree more. So I think it's time for Under the Hammer.
Under the Hammer.
Welcome to Under the Hammer, the segment where we answer your games and rules questions about the Genesys RPG as it impacts both rules, content creation, and, of course, play. And we've got more great listener questions this week. Of course, if you want to, get your questions to run to the top of the queue, just visit patreon.com/forgegenesys and become a Tier 2 Patreon supporter today. All right, Chris, bring us our first question.
Oh, man. This one comes from Balthazar Vandermeer. Balthazar. Via Facebook. I love you, bro. The presumption in this question. All right, let's talk about it. One issue that became glaringly obvious during play is that our group feels, well, if your group feels that way, your group feels that way, that's valid. Our group feels this magic system was not play tested properly. It's completely overpowered. We started playing Terranoth, and I have a player playing a rune master who has 4 yellows and a lesser rune. He just endlessly overwhelmed every scene with magic. And because Strain recovers so easily in the game, and the way he constructs his dice pool with a minor runestone granting a free effect, the difficulty level is so low, he is rolling staggering amounts of damage each time. This is completely over the top. It makes the kitted out warrior look like a weakling. We've studied the rules, and he appears to be doing it by the book. Even the player was feeling disgruntled since he didn't feel he earned the power he wields. Oh, that's unfortunate. I know there are those who will feel offended because they love the system, but it's frustrating because I want to love this game. Could I be getting the rules wrong? Can you help me to not lose interest in this game? Wow. Wow, that's a really heartfelt question, dude. I feel you. I really do. That's a really good question.
The one thing I will say, because I know you've got some things to say, Chris, one thing that I will say that Balthazar this is the first time that he's ever jumped into Genesys. And I've had a few conversations with him since, and yes, he's he had a bit of a wrong take with a few things, but
what did he have a wrong take with? I'm curious.
Look, for a start, as far as how somebody gets to 4 yellows in the first session.
Yeah, good. That shouldn't be physically possible.
No, it's not. With that in particular. And I think he also sort of, as far as the way that strain goes, and this is something that a lot of people get wrong. Cough, cough. I know you did in the live play. But it's something that everybody does wrong. And it's something which, to me, is a really important thing to remember when doing magic or anything resembling magic. And that is particularly with regards to strain. Strain, that to cast a spell, it costs 2 strain. That strain
Correct.
doesn't happen when you decide that you're going to cast the spell. That strain happens at the end of everything. So that is including after you've calculated what you're doing with advantages.
That's true. You can spend your advantage to recover lost strain, but only if you've already lost it. Yeah,
Correct.
You're correct. I commonly forget that.
Yeah. And it's something that a lot of people do. And it's the balancing mechanism in this system. Because what that means is that, sure, you have to work out that you are going to lose 2 strain at the end no matter what you do, okay, which could tip you over the edge. But remembering that most of your spell abilities that you're adding on with effect are going to be needing advantages to be able to power. So you've got this balancing act. Am I going to add burn to this fireball? Or am I going to recover the 2 strain that I will need to be able to survive casting this spell? So yeah, that was something that he was getting wrong as well. But, it's a big learning curve when you're buying into a new system like this. So yeah, that was probably the biggest issue.
Is he down in your half of the world?
No, he's not. He is. I don't think he is. I believe that he's from Europe somewhere, off the top of my head. And he's got a group there. He's been bringing people up to speed on his ongoing campaign, which clearly they're all enjoying now. There was that. So I think that's a bonus that we've ironed out some of the issues, which there always is going to be in any new system that you start. So, he's having a lot of fun, which is really good.
Oh, that's really good.
So yeah, but what is your opinion?
Well, I want to say first of all, Balthazar, if you're listening to this, man. Okay, so if you're in Europe, there is a high possibility that for you, or especially your obviously for you, I mean you wrote your question to us in English, but if you are comfortable having a game run for you that is GM'd in English, and because I apologize, I am only monolingual, and if your play group is comfortable having a game run for you in English, I will wake my ass up in the morning, and I'm telling you right now, and I normally would not do this, you contact me. I will run a one-shot for you. It will be magic heavy, and I will show you how it should be going. Okay, I will run it for you. I will run it for you, group. Okay, and we'll record it live, and we'll put it on this freaking podcast. Okay, straight up.
We'll do it.
All right, that is how passionate I am about how great the magic system is here. I think with the color you've given me, Hooly, this sounds like a scenario of somebody saying, They to use D&D parlance, they create a level 10 warrior and then think 5th edition is broken because he creamed a goblin in one round. Okay.
Right.
That's kind of the same analogy. Getting 4 yellows on any magic skill, that is insane. Okay. Is it possible to have 4 dice in the pool even as a beginner character? Of course it is. All right. Getting to 3 ranks, or much less 4 ranks, that is really. That's. It's possible to get 2 yellows and a green without even expending XP outside of maybe a characteristic boost, right? If you happen to have the right career that happens to give you the free ranks you need, a free rank. I mean, and that's possible. But keep in mind that you can still, as a beginner character, never get above 2 starting ranks. Okay, and then after that, even if it is a career skill for you, that's another. For Pete's sake, that's another 15, 20. That's another 35 XP you've got to spend just to get the 2 extra skill ranks. Okay, I mean that's wild. Okay, so that alone, I think is a huge part of the problem. As Hooly said, you will suffer strain. It doesn't matter what your roll is. It doesn't matter how much advantage you roll, and if you spend it to recover strain you've already taken, you suffer your strain when you're done. So you're going to suffer strain. Most magic users drop pretty quickly. The other thing, too, that a lot of people forget when it comes to magic, and this is one of the big balancing factors, is you don't use the standard rules for threat and despair. You have a special table that you use for threat and despair because it is twice as bad. 1 threat on a magic check is worth either 2 strain or a freaking wound. All right?
Yeah.
Player's choice. All right? 1 threat does that. All right? So as a GM, especially if you've got a character with a dice pool that powerful, they need to be having difficulties that are in kind. That means they need to be fighting threats that have degrees of ranks of adversary, which should be impacting especially the difficulty of damage spells that are being thrown at them, attack spells. Okay?
Yep.
The other key thing too is, because it doesn't matter if they get a free effect, like they still got to have the advantage to pull it off, but don't forget that adversary applies. And outside of attack spells, you are also have, as is covered in GM advice from guests we've had on this very show, from writers and people like that, outside of attack, you are fully capable and free to make these checks opposed checks as well.
Yeah.
All right. And that's because how do you combat 4 yellow dice in a pool? You go up against a 4 difficulty pool as well. All right.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's yellows versus purples, even just laws of probability. You're going to be getting threats. It's just going to happen. All right. Yeah. And those are going to, if properly spent, decimate the magic user. Decimate. So that's I don't know. That's my thoughts on this, Hooly.
I mean, the other thing to take into consideration as well, when you've got any sort of magic use, it says that if, and this probably doesn't really form part of his question, but a lot of the time when people are using any sort of magic uses, they are wanting to do things that they think that is going to, replicate a skill use for something else, so that they're going to be able to use magic for everything else, and they're never going to need to spend any XP on other than athletics or whatever else. And that's not true, because the rules actually state is that if there is something that you want to do that you would normally do with athletics or a normal skill, it should be harder using magic. That's something that it's spelled out in the core rules than when talking about magic.
Yeah, I completely agree. Magic use in this system is supposed to be incredibly dangerous as well. That's just what I want to return back to. It's supposed to be incredibly dangerous, and it's your negative dice capabilities that really manage that. So, but Balthazar, I'm dead serious, man. I'm dead serious. If your group can handle an English language DM or a GM based on where you are, if that's cool for you, I will offer right now to spend 4 hours of my time to run an actual play for you on this show, because I am that passionate about your question and that passionate about magic in the system. And you will all play magic users in my game.
He's in the Netherlands, by the way. I've just realized.
dude, I've one of our other D20 Radio Luns and one of my best friends. Lives in Rotterdam. I have spent time at his home on a couple different trips. Danny. So yeah, dude. Most Dutch people are pretty good with English, so yeah, dude, I will offer that right now, Balthazar. I will offer that right now.
Take that up. Chris is an amazing GM. All right, so thanks, Balthazar, for that question. It was great, and hopefully your campaign is going along really, really well. Our next question is from I Am Alex. I wonder if his name is Alex. Anyway. I Am Alex asks via our Patreon Discord, spears are important in my game and I want to have woomerers, a spear thrower used by the Australian Aboriginals, as an option. How would I create this? Equipment? A talent? My thought is to allow characters to use agility instead of brawn, since it would take more than raw strength. It would add range to the attack and possibly damage. Can you help me? Well, yes,
yeah,
I can.
we can. Why would he think he would be able to want to use brawn for this? It's going to be a ranged weapon.
Exactly right. I think it's because, as I mentioned before, spear doesn't appear in the ranged weapons in Terranoth because it's one of the weapons that's predominantly used as a melee weapon, but below that it has some details, and I'll go into that. Look, it's on page 94 if you need to know. And the spear is listed with the profile under the ranged weapons, and it provides in the melee weapons, and it provides the following template: that it's range skill, it's damage +2, it's critical of 4, its range is short, accurate 1, and limited ammo. So, yeah, which is cool. Which is interesting because they've actually said the damage +2. I'm going to double check that because I'm not sure that I'm right. But it's still applying strength there to a ranged weapon, which is really quite interesting.
Well, and that's a very interesting one, and it's totally valid. And when it comes to a thrown weapon that's ranged, it makes sense that you would use your brawn for damage like that, but not to build the pool. And I think that's important.
I'm 100% right. It is damage +2 under the profile.
Yeah,
which is cool.
Like, so I like the Woomera is an Australian Aboriginal atlatl.
It is.
You're familiar with the atlatl, right?
Yeah.
And I mean that's a very ancient weapon that's been used around the world. We don't have common record of it being used for warfare, but I mean it's so uncommon to be historically recorded. Do you know what I mean? Because I mean I hate to profile, but you're Australian. I mean, are there? But seriously, I mean, are there accounts of the Woomera being used for warfare at all, or was it strictly used for hunting?
Look, there are some records of it being used in warfare between tribes, but predominantly it's used as a hunting weapon. And look, for those who don't know what a Woomera is, I'll just briefly sort of touch base on that. Its primary use is for traditional hunting and spearfishing, although not necessarily a weapon of warfare, as I said. The Woomera is used as an extension of a person's arm to give it greater range and to make it move faster. So it's not something that one could use in melee combat, for example. So, I guess in this case, agility is still the appropriate attribute. Because we're talking about a ranged weapon. So, there's really no changes there. So what it does is that they put the spear in this device. It just gives momentum through leverage to make the weapon go further and with a greater punch, effectively. But so for me, and this was my sort of opinion when we started talking about it on the Discord, was that it's going to increase the range from the thrown weapon. I think that it probably gives the equivalent of strong arm as the talent, so it would allow the weapon to be thrown at up to medium range as opposed to short range. And the spear is still going to be accurate, so no changes there. I'd also suggest maybe prepare one, since it's not just a matter of pulling out the spear and throwing it. There is some sort of loading of the weapon to do that.
I would almost give it prepare 2.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, I mean, as a possibility. I mean, I would play test with it in a round. Getting one of these things out, loading it, and doing it. I have used an atlatl. I've actually played around with one. It is not quick to load. Once you have it loaded, it's very quick and very, very crazy. But it takes a good bit to get it set up. And like the equivalent of a round, I don't know, for a weapon that's going to be this inexpensive, a thrown weapon at medium range, I think it's worth considering. If you find it to be too much, though, but I would say prepare 1 at a minimum, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. And lastly, I don't think the way to deal with this is as a piece of equipment. It's not really a talent. To me, I think that it's more like an attachment that you would put on a spear. And a spear has a hard point of 1. And it's not very often that people use that one for anything. So I think that you would have this as an attachment, but you would have some wording in it that it is actually removed or it's separate from the spear. And, the spear might need to go through some modifications or whatever else to be able to be used with the warmer. To make it an attachment, it would then have a damage increase of +1 initially, and he may consider additional modifiers, maybe 1 or 2, that increases maybe that accurate by 1 and then increases the damage by 1. Or even you might want to increase that to long instead of medium.
Well, okay, I want to put this in perspective for you, though.
Sure.
In Boy Scouts, I built and used an atlatl. Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I've used it, and the guy who and dude, medium range is totally acceptable. That's like table stakes. And you can get and we got to where we were stupidly accurate at medium range. Okay. So I think the accurate quality is fitting. The dude who taught us how to do this, though, he had one where he had what I would consider to be a long range atlatl. And what I mean is that when I used it at the age of 13, I tossed a long arrow, and I'm not kidding. It was the circumference of an arrow shaft. Okay. Mm-hmm. This quote unquote spear or dart, but it was 5 feet long. And I tossed it 100 yards. Okay.
Wow.
I mean, and it flew like you would not believe. But the smaller ones couldn't go that far. It was a function of the actual spear. So I think long range is actually reasonable. But the thing is, your accuracy goes out the window at that point. If you had an accurate quality, like I love the idea of using this as an attachment that has the prepare capability and increases your range and gives you the accurate quality. Yep. Mm-hmm. But if you had like a long range version of this that brought it up to long range, I think it should actually not only remove the accurate quality, I think it might even have inaccurate one.
Yeah.
Just realistically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Totally brings new meaning to Shakey-Spear in the park. I'm so sorry. Go on.
Our last question comes in from Steve Assay via Facebook. He says, in my campaign, the party happened across a small village. The leader of the townsfolk approached the PCs for assistance in helping them to fight off a group of raiders who had been plaguing them and the surrounding region for some time. The village is ill-equipped to deal with the situation, as the village consists of farmers, not soldiers. The PCs agreed, so I'm going to be running the scenario as a skill challenge. Oh, good for you. However, if the attack occurs regardless, what are some possible rewards / consequences if the PCs pass or fail? Is a skill challenge even appropriate?
Well, the answer to that question is a skill challenge is definitely appropriate. And I think this is
skill challenge is always appropriate.
Yes, it is. So, yeah. What's your thoughts?
Well, okay.
You're the skill challenge wizard.
Yeah. So he wants to know what some of the rewards and consequences could be if they pass or fail.
Yep.
Let's come to that last. As far as like, look, you could have the party go off and find the bandits and take them on, and that could just be a standard combat encounter, of course. If you wanted to do this as a skill challenge, I would recommend drawing inspiration from Seven Samurai or The Magnificent Seven, which is the same film, or season 1, episode 3 of The Mandalorian, I think. You know, where it's like, all right, farmers, we're going to teach you how to fend these bandits off, right? And it becomes a skill challenge where the party is teaching them how to do this. And it's like, we're going to dig defensive trenches around the town. We're going to put up embattlements. You have, it's a montage where you're teaching them how to shoot and train, and stuff like that. And think of all the wonderful skills you could put in place for that. Leadership, obviously. Okay. Charm, obviously. Athletics for digging trenches, knowledge tactics or something similar like that, for education or building battlements, actual combat checks, which would represent training these farmers, right? Yeah. And teaching them. There's a whole plethora of things you can do here, to get them ready. And then if you're successful, it plays out narratively where they attack and the villagers, the farmers rise up and drive them off and out of the region or kill them all, right? Then you can have a lot of fun with stuff like threat and despair, because that can relate to dead farmers.
Right.
Villagers who didn't survive the incursion, even though everyone succeeded. right?
Yeah.
Even though they may have succeeded in the skill challenge. You could, depending on how complicated you want it to be, you could do, it depends on how long you want it to be. You could do, if you want it to be average, you could do like 15 net successes before 3 failures are achieved, 3 failed checks. Not 3 failures, 3 failed checks. If you wanted it to go a lot longer with a higher degree of success, you could do 20 net successes before 5 failed checks are reached. And that really gives you the option for consequences because you've got the greater chance of despair and threat being rolled there, so that plans go awry. All right. But if they succeed in the skill challenge, the village drives the raiders off, and their rewards could be everything from a home base in the town, which is a fantastic thing. If the farmers don't have much money to give, and the PCs need some kind of reward that is material, one thing I can highly recommend is information. It's like, we don't have much, but we'll give you this, and it's a small chest, and there's a few coins in it, and a few pieces of jewelry, and at the bottom, what looks like a treasure map that's very old and leads them on a whole new journey for an actual combat encounter that's quite dangerous with some serious loot behind it.
Yeah.
And if they fail, then the villagers are unprepared. Maybe that leads to the decimation of the town and the slaughter of most of the townspeople, who then have to leave and abandon the town in disgust. Maybe it leads to the villagers deciding to leave the town before everyone attacks and just leave all their livelihoods behind. And the consequences of that, quite simply, could be extremely bad reputation for the PCs. I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
One thing that you can do to sort of say, is the skill challenge appropriate? If you want to borrow directly from Star Wars, you do have mass combat rules. And if you want the abridged version that actually has some really good examples, if you can get your hands on it, Friends Like These, which has been done by our very own Keith Capel, that has some really good examples of how to apply mass combat with small little scenarios. So you could have that they have to fortify this particular place, as Chris mentioned, but you have so many troops, and that could be represented by certain areas which are going to represent your village that you have to protect. So you might have to protect the north, south, and east wing because the area directly behind you might be the ocean or a large lake or something like that the bad guys don't have the means to be able to get around. And so you've got to defend these 3 points with 2 dice worth of villages. But the villages are really hopeless, so you might have 2 setback die for each area. And so you have to invent scenarios that you can start to whittle that away. Perhaps that you want to, you're a more social character. So you might have to talk to the neighboring village and maybe negotiate a trade agreement with them because there's been some sort of big drama that's gone on between the two, which stems back to the leader of the village that you're trying to defend, that his wife basically was murdered by the leader of the other village. So you've got to negotiate that to then get more people involved, and that's going to increase the numbers. And then at the end, when you finish you might have 2 or 3 rounds to basically do that. And those rounds can go for a long time. But the PCs have to establish where they're going, who they're helping, and really make it a difficult choice for the PCs so that they have to start splitting themselves up. So if you've got one PC who is always the support character, they have to work out who they're going to go and support, because all of this stuff doesn't necessarily happen at the one time. So there's all sorts of things that you can have. And then at the very end, you start a big mass combat. And hopefully we'll see the mass combat rules in some way, shape or form from Edge turned into the Genesys version, because I think that it's absolutely fantastic. But if you get a chance, get either Friends Like These or I can't remember which the leadership book, Rules of Engagement, I think it's called. See if you can get your hands on that, because the mass combat rules are fantastic for Star Wars, and they apply easily to Genesys, just with a little bit of you don't even need to change anything. It's great. So that's another way to do it as well. But definitely there's some options for you. And, you want to make it interesting without just turning into a dice roll, is what am I suggesting.
Exactly. But do a skill challenge, because skill challenges are awesome.
Yes.
Good questions. Good questions all. Mass combat's awesome too. I love you, Keith. Oh, well, Hooly, I think that does indeed bring us to the end of yet another show.
Indeed it does. But we'll be back with a new episode in a few weeks' time as we get back to our regular schedule. And yet again, we must admit to being very, very busy with real life. That's what's kept us away from the podcasting. But so's holidays, and we've got to have a break too sometimes. But in the process of planning and scheduling an episode, with some special guests to help us tackle a review and a QA episode, as we keep on promising, for Keyforge Secrets of the Crucible. So keep an eye on that. But Chris, we all also want to know what other cool show topics everyone wants us to cover, right?
We certainly do want to know that. And as Hooly mentioned, guys, we are, of course, still accepting questions about Secrets from the Crucible. We have gotten precious few questions about Secrets of the Crucible. Get them to us, guys. We want them. They really help flesh out that kind of show talk. But honestly, if you have questions on that or any other show topics or mechanics you'd like us to dive into, let us know. How can they do that, Hooly?
Well, they can email us at forgegenesys@d20radio.com, or they can post it up via one of our many social media platforms where we have a dedicated post calling for questions, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and, of course, the FFG forums for as long as they're around for. And you can just search for @ForgeGenesys. Now, I've also been seeing some great conversations on the D20 Radio Discord channel, and, of course, truly dedicated conversations with our Patreons on our very own Patreon Discord server.
Yes, and we would love to hear from you all. Don't forget, you can also join, as Hooly alluded to, the even larger discussion in D20 Radio, in the D20 Radio Facebook group where we nerds congregate to cross-pollinate. And of course, don't forget to give us a like or a follow us as well on any of our social media sites. You can also please drop us a review on those sites or on your favorite podcatcher, including iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more. You can also visit us on our website at forgegenesys.com. So what is next for us, Hooly? What is our next show going to be about?
Well, Chris, you mentioned it a little bit earlier. We're going to be taking a look at armor and the way that it's constructed using the Genesys rules. We'll be taking a look at, pretty much everything. If you can slap it on yourself to protect you from the incoming fire, we've got you covered. So we'll be in a very similar process to what we've done tonight with the rules for creating weapons. We'll be doing that for creating armor. Very exciting.
That's awesome. And listeners, if you have questions for this topic as well, shoot us an email.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget, even if you don't have any questions about armor, you might have some in relation to gear or to attachments. And don't forget, we will be doing future episodes about that topic in this series as well. So, that was an episode and a half. But that's a wrap for us for the moment. Thank you for listening, and we hope you will join us next time as we continue to explore the Genesys role-playing game. I'm GM Hooly. May your triumphs be many and your despairs be few.
And I'm GM Chris, wishing you peace, love, and good gaming.
Thank you all again for joining us, and remember, the Forge Podcast helping you hone your gaming edge. The Forge, a Genesys podcast, is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Forge is a fan-generated podcast. All the information provided on the podcast, social media, and related website is not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains the property of the Forge, a Genesys RPG podcast, and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The Genesys role-playing game, Genesys logo, Genesys Foundry, content, and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games. All products available on the Genesys Foundry website remain the property of their respective companies and individuals. For more information about the Forge, the Genesys RPG podcast, visit www.forgegenesys.com.